You're live now? Yep. Okay. Okay, members, welcome to the 45th meeting of the Public Accounts Committee in this 22-27 mandate. Can I advise members that the committee meeting will be recorded and broadcast throughout Parliament buildings and online. However, there could be a slight delay between moving between any private and public sessions, so please be patient with the system. Can I also advise anybody joining us in the public gallery that they're welcome to use mobile devices as long as they're in airplane mode and that all devices are muted. You can connect to the Assembly Wi-Fi. Password details are available on the gallery rules, and it is not permitted to take photographs or record any of today's meeting. Okay, members, we have apologies from Colin Crawford, MLA, and I understand Padraig Delargy, MLA, be joining us remotely. Members, we'll move on to the draft minutes. Can I refer members to a copy of the draft minutes of the meeting held on the 5th of June at page 6 to 16 of the meeting pack? If members are agreed that that's an accurate reflection of the meeting, I'll sign them. Thank you. Okay, members, can I remind you all to ensure that you've considered the full agenda for the meeting and that any relevant declarations are made early in the meeting to ensure that they're recorded in an open session. Can I ask if members have any register of interest to declare for this meeting? Cheryl?
Board of Governor for Sunnylands.
Yeah, thank you.
APS to the Education Minister and Board of Governor.
Board of Governors, Clay School, Katie.
Yeah.
Board of Governor, Jamara Primary School. My wife also works for EA.
Grant. Very good. Okay then, members. A couple of things. David Honeyford and Cahill Boylan, MLA, undertook a visit yesterday afternoon as part of the inquiry into access GP services. A report on the visit will follow in due course, which will be provided to all members. And I'd just like to place on record my thanks to Dr. Sean McDermott and his team at Ahali Surgery for what I understand to have been a very warm reception and a very worthwhile visit. So it is appreciated on behalf of the committee that David and Cahill met with the team there as well. Is there anything that you want to say about the visit, or?
Chair, well, I'd rather, once we do the report, we'll comment on it, Chair, yeah. Once you do the feedback, we'll comment then.
We'll wait for the report, that's fine, but okay, it's important to put on record. Just a brief word of congratulations to Marion as well. Marion has a new grandson, Luke, so congratulations, Marion, to your daughter and to your family and to yourself, of course, which is some positive news. Okay, members, matters arising. Is there anything that members like to raise? Okay, members can refer to page 38 of the table papers for correspondence raising concerns from a member of the public around the systemic exclusion, financial misuse and lack of post-19 support for adults with complex, severe learning difficulties. Members, the correspondence is written to a number of departments, committees and public bodies. Are you content, members, that we note this correspondence forwarded to the Economy Committee for their consideration, as it appear to more directly relate to their remit? Okay, members, agenda item 7, we'll move on now to the inquiry into managing the school's estate. This is our evidence session. We've looked forward to this for some time. Can I refer members to the relevant documentation for this inquiry? The Northern Ireland Audit Office briefing paper on managing the school's estate at pages 22 to 28 of the meeting pack. The Northern Ireland Audit Office report on managing the school's estate at pages 29 to 99 of the meeting pack. The Department for Education and the Education Authority witness biographies, pages 100 to 101 of the meeting pack, and also a tabled letter from the Department of Education providing information as requested by members last week on the total maintenance costs across the school estate. There's also further information as discussed in relation to some appropriate questions that members will wish to raise. Okay, I'll take this opportunity to welcome to the meeting today our witnesses, Ronnie Armour, the Acting Permanent Secretary of the Department of Education. You're very welcome, Ronnie. Stephen Creagh, the Deputy Director of Investment and Infrastructure for the Department of Education. Stephen, you're very welcome to the committee. Richard Pengelly, Chief Executive of the Education Authority. Richard, you're very welcome with us today. Paul Crooks, the Assistant Director of Facilities Management for the Education Authority. And we're joined by Stuart and Julie from the Treasury Office of Accounts, Department of Finance. You're very welcome. And also joining us, the full house, with Dorinnia, Carville, the Controller Auditor General, and her team. You're all very welcome. Mr Armour, Mr Creagh, Mr Pengelly and Mr Crooks, welcome to the PAC and thank you for agreeing to attend the committee today. I'll invite you, Mr Armour, to briefly make opening remarks and then we'll follow with questions from members. Thank you.
Thank you for your welcome and for the opportunity to appear before the committee to discuss the Managing the Schools Estate report. This is an important report that, in my view, does several things. It highlights the scale of the challenge we face. It challenges us to reflect on the environment in which our children learn. It provides a roadmap for improved data management and long-term planning. And it rightly draws attention to the long-standing and significant underinvestment in the school estate, all of which I have no doubt we will have an opportunity to explore during our discussion today. At the outset, I want to be clear that we welcome this report and its recommendations, but in doing so I must also acknowledge the very significant challenges we face and will continue to face in terms of implementing them. My colleagues and I are not here today to make excuses. We very much recognise that we're not where we would wish to be, and that given our circumstances, we're regrettably unable to provide the level of service that we believe our schools rightly deserve. We believe they do deserve better, and will continue to make that case as we seek the funding necessary to address the issues raised in the report and take forward its recommendations. As we begin today, Chair, it might be helpful to briefly outline the distinct responsibilities of DE and EA and to outline for the committee precisely what we are able to do in the context of the funding available to us. In terms of our respective responsibilities, the Department is responsible for providing the funding and setting the strategic direction and policy framework, while EA colleagues have responsibility for operational delivery, both in controlled and maintained schools. Voluntary grammar schools and grant-maintained integrated schools do not fall under EA's remit, but do receive additional funding for landlord maintenance. Both organisations, the Department and EA, work closely together to manage the school estate as effectively as possible. Both organisations have a huge and increasing workload. Our work is broadly categorised as follows: major works, school enhancement, SEND capital investment, minor works, maintenance and youth capital. While there is substantial work ongoing, when it comes to maintenance, we are currently only able to undertake urgent and immediate works required to keep schools open and safe. Regarding our funding, the executive allocation provided the Department with a capital budget of $388.4 million for 25-26, but that figure includes the Fresh Start Agreement funding of $59.9 million and $102.8 million earmarked for the Strull Education Campus project. Together, the Strull and Fresh Start allocations, totalling $162.7 million, account for over 40% of the capital allocation this year. This leaves $225.7 million for all other capital programmes, down slightly by $8.6 million from the equivalent available at the start of 24-25, and $83 million less than was required at the start of this financial year. To address this gap, we have submitted proposed additional bids totalling $91.6 million in the June monitoring round, and I can provide more detail on that to the committee if that would be helpful. These figures, I believe, highlight the difficult decisions that staff must make in terms of prioritisation, and must also be seen in the context of a decade of static capital budgets, rapidly rising construction costs, a 15-year maintenance backlog, and growing demand, especially for children with complex special educational needs. Despite these pressures, I want today to pay tribute to our school leaders, teachers and support staff for the outstanding work they do in what are often far from ideal surroundings. We all agree that they and the children they serve deserve better. Chair, the Audit Office report clearly sets out what is needed, and we are committed to delivering against the recommendations. But I must be equally clear, doing so will take time, and without additional resource, we risk exacerbating what is already a challenging and deteriorating situation. Simply moving resource from one area to another is not a long-term viable strategy. In short, in the context of the many competing demands and priorities we face, we must avoid the danger of designing strategies and processes to address the concerns identified in the report, only to find that we lack the funding to put them into meaningful action. Both issues need to be addressed. Chair, in conclusion, we recognise the need for a more strategic approach, supported by clearly defined and effective structures and underpinned by robust, accurate and up-to-date data. Therefore, we welcome the committee's scrutiny today and the opportunity to discuss with you how we can deliver this essential reform. Thank you.
Thanks very much for those opening remarks that lay out a very honest reflection of where things sit, so that is to be appreciated. The school's estate, as you'll all acknowledge, is a hugely important public sector asset for which you are responsible. But it's not just about buildings. This is about providing facilities that are suitable for the education of our children right across our society. The organisations you lead are responsible for the management and maintenance of the buildings and spaces that are used to educate all of our children. But many school buildings are in a terrible state and in need of urgent repair and, of course, essential works. Are you fulfilling your responsibilities as accounting officers?
Sure, I would have to agree, as I said in my opening remarks, that our schools are not, or many of our schools are not in a condition that we would want them to be in, and I absolutely accept that that's not acceptable. And I'm sure members of the committee will have visited schools, as I have visited schools, and been embarrassed and indeed annoyed at the state of some of those schools, because they fall far below what I would expect or what any of us at the table today would want. Am I fulfilling my responsibilities as accounting officer? I believe I am fulfilling those responsibilities. But if I ask a different question, am I satisfied with the work that we're able to do? Then the answer to that would be no, I don't think we are doing enough. We're doing what we can, but that, I accept, is insufficient. And the report, I think, is helpful insofar as it rightly highlights that we are dealing with an ageing and dispersed estate. Our spending power has been reduced, we have the backlog, and we have insufficient SEN places, and all of those things, I think, are coming together in a way that is far from helpful to those of us who are trying to manage the situation. I think we're dealing with an unprecedented situation. And I do want to say that the teams in both the department and EA are working exceptionally hard to try and address the challenges that we face. But I equally accept that we need a much more strategic management approach, as the report highlights. We need to have better data. We're working at that, but we still have some way to go. So therefore, I don't underestimate the challenge that faces us. So, are we meeting our accounting officer responsibilities? I think we are meeting them, but I think we're doing that in a very difficult environment that is extremely challenging. And I think we are constantly trying to balance the competing demands before us, in the knowledge that, you know, we're not providing the service that any of us would want to provide.
Yes, and that's not news to any of us. This has been a long-standing problem. Why has it taken so long to recognise this problem, more importantly act in relation to it, particularly when it comes to the lack of data that is available to measure the problem?
I think, Chair, we do, and we have recognised it, and I think that the report again shines a light on that. I don't think it's a case that we didn't or we don't recognise the need for data. I think we have struggled with the resources that we have available to us to ensure that we have the data we need. Now we're making, I think, progress on that, but there is still a long way to go. But there is, I think, no quick fix to it, but we are working to try and deliver the solutions.
No quick fix, but how do we compare with other jurisdictions in that regard?
I suspect other jurisdictions are struggling. Certainly, when you look at other jurisdictions, they have a better strategic approach than us. So I'm not shying away from that. But I think they are also facing a lot of the challenges that we're facing around the funding issues and the difficulty with raising costs.
The Non-Earned Audit Office, have been quite critical of the Department and the Education Authority in relation to the schools estate. It's difficult not to agree with them in a lot of ways. It's been stated that the current approach to estate management is unsustainable due to a lack of strategic oversight. Do you agree with that statement in its entirety?
I think we absolutely need to have better strategic oversight, and I think the recommendations in the report are certainly helpful in pointing us in the right direction. We are working to try and get that better strategic oversight, but yes, I wouldn't disagree that's a requirement and that's needed.
Okay, and just further to that as well, the Audit Office also criticised the absence of a clear estate strategy. You've made reference to it. It's been a long-standing gap, a very clear problem for a long time. When was a strategy last drafted or proposed, and why was it not implemented?
In terms of when the strategy was last drafted, Stephen, do you have a date in terms of that? But
We've no real date on that, Chair, other than going back in time under the review of public administration. There was the Northern Ireland Schools Modernisation Programme, and that tasked the Department to examine the three strands, the three pillars to that, which were the procurement, planning, procurement and delivery. Out of that was born area planning and the sustainable schools policies following the Bain examination of the schools estates numbers, and what was the headline then was the empty seats around the estate. The procurement elements were looking at how we can better procure and deliver, and then the delivery aspect was looking back in that day was the education infrastructure procurement service. That was in the time when we had the 5 education and library boards, very dispersed, very different ways of it. There was some degree of commonality, but very different approaches depending on which board area you were in. Out of that, there were various strategies developed in terms of looking at the various Treasury requirements at the time and DFP requirements, where we had to look at strategic partnering, we had to look at PFI and PPP arrangements, as well as our conventional procurement. So all of that was brought forward. You may recall we did look to bring forward strategic frameworks for our majors, minors and our professional commissions. But to be fair, that is going back some time. We've had various issues have impacted on the programme over the years. With the introduction of area planning, the programme was rebased, and effectively our entire announced major capital programme was effectively collapsed because it didn't comply with the Minister's emerging policy framework at that time. Various strategies were developed from that to get that back on track, and I believe that since 2012, with our approach particularly for majors skill enhancement programme, we have sought to address that. I can't take you through where we are in the estate strategy, but passing it back to Ronnie.
Other members will be delving into that in more detail.
Okay.
I just am concerned, even at this early stage of this session today, that I'm hearing a lot about recognising what the problem is, but not a lot around what action has actually been taken to deal with the problem that is there. That concerns me.
And I think you're right to be concerned, Chair. I mean, we do recognise what the problem is, and I suppose what I've been trying to say to the committee is there is a willingness and a desire on our part to do it, but we are struggling in terms of the resource we have, both in terms of the funding and the people to do what is required, and therefore I think very often we've been forced down a road that we're firefighting. But I wouldn't want the committee to think there is any lack of ambition or desire on our part to do what what we know needs to be done. But I'm trying to be realistic, I suppose, with the committee and say there are very real challenges in terms of delivering what we want to deliver, but we are committed to working towards that, and that's hopefully what we'll be able to demonstrate to the committee today. That's what we're trying to do.
You very clearly stated about the willingness and desire to get this issue resolved, but as I've said, there's a lot of looking but not a lot of action, Mr. Armour, and that doesn't fill me, I'm sure other members, with confidence. The Northern Ireland Audit Office report includes a comment in quotations from the Department that to continue to recommend detailed plans for preventative maintenance, plans to immediately reduce the maintenance backlog, plans for a proactive maintenance of PFI buildings when they return to the school's estate, and plans to target funding or other substantially sustainability interventions to achieve the targets set out in the Climate Action Act Northern Ireland 2022 in the absence of significant additional funding and with escalating costs and SEN pressures is neither realistic nor helpful. Can you confirm if this remains the Department's position?
Chair, I've certainly read that in the report, and I understand, I think, what the Department was trying to say at that time. They're not words I would have used. And it's not the position of the Department, but I do understand the frustration that there is, I think, behind those words. I suppose staff often feel like they're trying to push a very large boulder up an ever increasingly steep hill, and no matter how much we do, I think very often we can't keep pace with what is happening because of the resource issue, and I suspect that's the sentiment that was behind those words. But they're not words I would have used, and it's not the position of the Department.
What is an accurate position?
Well, I think the accurate position is that we accept the report. We are working to try and address the recommendations, which I think are helpful. I think they shine a very important light on what needs to be done and how we should be taking that forward. And our position is that we are working to achieve that, but it's against a backdrop of not having sufficient resources to do the work we're doing.
Mr. Armour, we'll always be working to achieve something. Have you a target in mind in terms of time as to when that actually will be achieved? Otherwise, we're always going to be talking about wanting to resolve these problems and not actually achieving anything.
Well, in terms of the strategic approach and the strategy, I've asked Stephen to work on that. A skeleton strategy is coming together. It would be my intention to put something to the Minister in the autumn with a view to having the strategy in place by early 2026. In terms of the backlog that we have in terms of maintenance, we are constantly working at that. But we simply do not have the funding to address the issues that we're required to address. EA colleagues are doing a huge amount of work around condition surveys within the resource that they currently have available, but obviously if there was further resource available, that work could be done at a quicker pace. So we will continue to work, and we are working, I would contend, at pace in a number of these areas, but it is in the context of all of the other competing demands that we're trying to deal with at this point in time.
Yeah, we're very aware of the various other demands, and indeed we have no doubt in relation to the funding problem that exists. But are you certain in your role as accounting officer that you have maximised your resources to the best possible benefit, given that there is no strategy in place?
I think we are constantly looking at our resources, and we're constantly deploying and redeploying the resources to the areas of greatest need. So in that respect, I'm content that we're doing the best we can with the resources that we have, but I'm not here to suggest that what we're doing is good enough, and I've been very clear about that. But I think, as accounting officer, I'm content that we're using the limited resources we have in the best way that we can.
When can we hope for a strategic plan to be in place?
Well, I'm hoping that the strategic plan, as I say, Stephen's working on a skeleton plan with a view to putting an outline plan to the Minister in the autumn, and we would want working alongside EA colleagues and others, we'd want to have the strategy in place by early 2026 is the date that we're working towards.
Are we on target, Stephen?
We're working on that, Chair. The issue that Ronnie has referenced there is the capacity to bring this forward, because we operate within the division with very slim teams across our various. We're structured by programme, and we have a lot of vacancies that we're dealing with. So we are working towards that. We would have preferred to have this in place much sooner, and we gave a commitment that we would in response to the audit report by the end of March. But to be fair, when we looked at that on reflection, that was extremely ambitious given the significant strategic nature of this document and the amount of work that would need to go in, because it will set the direction and speed for the department in the next budgetary year, the CSR 3-year and the 10-year ISNI period.
Okay, thank you. And finally for me, the Audit Office report painted a picture of a very muddled landscape. Are the Department and the Education Authority working together effectively, in your opinion? And how could that working relationship improve?
Well, I think, Chair, working relationships can always improve, but I would say we are working effectively. I mean, Richard and I are both relatively new in our roles. We've worked together in the past. We're working, I think, very closely together at the moment to try and address many of the issues. We have a number of mechanisms in place to assist at a lower level as we work through the organisation. For example, we have the Capital and Maintenance Group and the Managing Capital Investment Group, which are chaired at Deputy Secretary level and bring together officials. I mean, Stephen and Paul at a working level are meeting on a fortnightly basis in terms of heads of service. We're actually in contact with each other on a daily basis in terms of the relationship. So I can understand that this is a very complex area, and I can understand that it looks like it is challenging, and it is challenging. But I think we are, over the last number of months, I think we've come a long way in terms of the relationship between the two organisations and the work that we're doing together. I mean, one of the things that I am doing is we are going to reconstitute with the first meeting, hopefully in September, the Governance Oversight Group. That hasn't met for a while, and I think that is a...
When did it last meet?
I think it was about a year ago. But last year, and that's not, you know, I can't make an excuse for that. It should have been meeting.
What was the reason for not meeting, just Ronnie?
Well, the reason for it is again with resource and the people are stretched within the department. But I'm not wanting to make that as an excuse. I think the group should have met. But what we're now doing is reconstituting that group. So I've looked at the terms of reference. I'll be talking to Richard and others. I want that group back in place, and actually it was previously chaired at Deputy Secretary level. I think it should be chaired at Permanent Secretary level, so I will be chairing that group from September. And I think one of the other things that we need to do is not just have Richard and I and others around the table, but bring in some of our sectoral bodies as well, the chief executives of those. So I think, you know, we are in the process of re-establishing that, and I want that in place by September to have proper oversight.
And when you say in place by September, do you mean fully functioning and stood up?
Yes, I want it stood up by September, yeah.
Okay. And Mr. Pengelly, would you agree with Mr. Armour's assessment of the relationship between the Education Authority and the Department of Education? It's just that it's been my understanding, and I'm sure others, that the relationship between the Department and the Education Authority over some years could be described as somewhat difficult at times.
I think, Chair, you might be the master of understatement in that. I think the relationship has been very, very poor, to be frank. But like Ronnie, I genuinely feel we're in a new era for this relationship. As Ronnie said, the two of us have worked together before. We know each other. You know, we know we call a spade when we're talking to each other. We are working hard to recalibrate this. I think what I'm hearing from you is what I would describe as some very, very understandable and legitimate frustration at the pace of things. I would want, if I could, to try and make something of a virtue of that. My observation in coming into the education sector, not having worked in it previously, is there is a tendency in some spaces to do what we've always done and hope for slightly different results. What Ronnie and I are trying to do now, instead of starting with the question, what's the process and how do we make that a bit more efficient. We're wanting to genuinely re-engineer how we do things. So we could have quite quickly just topped and tailed what we'd done previously, badged it as a strategy and presented it. That's not enough. It wouldn't satisfy either of us. What we want to do now is take a step back and understand what actually in strategic terms are we trying to achieve by this work, and let's be, all of us, be very, very clear about that, and then let's design a system and an approach that's actually going to deliver that for us. That's going to take a bit of time. We share your frustration, and we need to put every possible bit of energy that we can into that. We will get there. The relationship that you've touched on doesn't just impact on our work in terms of management of education estate. It ripples through every aspect of our work together. But we understand that, we talk about it. I suspect Ronnie would say we talk about it far too often. But we will work together. I'm absolutely confident that things are improving. The relationship undoubtedly is better today than it was a couple of years ago. And some of that's the work that Ronnie and I are doing. But most of it is the fact that what we are doing more than anything is giving our colleagues in both organisations permission to think and act differently and be free of some of the traditional constraints and risk aversion. So we're working towards it. I'm confident we will do it. I think the challenge for us is to continue to pick up the pace on that.
I appreciate your honesty in recognising that there has been very serious challenges with the relationship to date. And I also welcome that the positive vibes that I'm hearing in relation to how both of you as leaders within the Department and the Education Authority are working together. Albeit, would you view the need for a cultural shift within both the Education Authority and the Department in terms of working together to achieve the best possible outcomes for our children, young people, our schools?
I think absolutely, Chair, and that's what we're trying to. I think that's what we're trying to give leadership around to drive that cultural shift. I think we're getting great support from the Minister in terms of the work that we're trying to do, and I think we're also getting support from the EA Board. And in terms of the working relationship that you were referring to, I mean, there are numerous mechanisms whereby we come together at a senior level. So Richard and I meet on a fortnightly basis, but there are structures there as well around the departmental board, around my audit and risk committee, Richard's board, governance and accountability meetings. And I think we are collectively trying to drive forward a process that does change the culture in both organisations and fosters better working relationships. And that's why I started my comments by saying things can always improve. And I think even after Richard and I drive through the work that we're doing, there'll still be room for improvement. It will be a work in progress, but I think we are making good strides forward.
Chair, could I just add to that? I think we need to be absolutely clear that the problem, insofar as it exists, isn't about people, it's about systems. I think we have a system that has constrained people. When I go out across the organisation, I did some staff engagement yesterday. People are crying out to be allowed to do things differently, and they see the way they want to work and engage. I think as senior leaders we have failed them in the past, but it's just to be clear, this isn't a critique of individuals, and it's not us saying people need to behave differently. People need to be freed up and supported to do what inherently they want to do.
Okay, thanks very much for that. I'll be coming back in throughout the session. Tom Buchanan.
Thank you, Chair. And thank you, folk, for being with us today and for the answers that has been given. I'm going to be following on from the Chair, and some of the things may overlap slightly, but that'll not do a bit harm to give us a bit of an understanding of where you actually are. And you are aware, as the Chair have said, of the Audit Office report highlighting the fact that the Department doesn't have a school strategy in place at the moment, doesn't take a strategic approach to the management of the school's estate. How long has it been since there has been a school strategy in place to deliver on the school's estate?
Well, I think Stephen has sort of indicated that it's been quite some considerable time, if ever we really had it.
How is that? How considerable time could be 10 years, it could be 5 years. How long is it since there was a strategy in place?
The papers that I was referring to were in and around 2010, 2011, whenever we had a number of policy frameworks were coming forward. I referenced the Bain review. The outworking of that was the development of the area planning and the Minister's Sustainable Schools policy. There's a number of other policy frameworks come forward as well. It is worth saying that while we didn't have, since then, we didn't have an overarching strategy. We had a number of call them lower level strategies. We had a strategy for bringing forward the major capital works programme, that's the new builds, in terms of how do we actually dovetail the selection and delivery approach in with the Minister's policy framework in terms of area planning. Now that took a number of years to actually work that through, but we had sort of medium level strategies of that sort of ilk. We had other strategies in terms of we had a major programme, we had a minor programme, but there was a gap in between, and a very real gap and need where there was those mid-sized works that just weren't getting brought forward. We developed a strategy to introduce the school enhancement programme, which I'm sure you'll be aware of, and that is our mid-scale works. Originally anything up to 4 million, but we've had to look at that with the current market inflation and construction inflation issues associated with that, if that's sufficient for your answer.
The gaps that you talk about, how did you manage that?
The gaps in terms of, sorry?
Yeah, you said you had a strategy for one thing, you had a strategy for something else, but there was a wee gap here somewhere. How did you manage that?
Yeah, well, it's worth sort of saying, going back in time, when we had the educational library boards, condition and suitability surveys were actually carried out. So we did have some metrics. Now, granted, those are out of date, there's no question, and we've acknowledged that in response to the report, and Ronnie has acknowledged that in his comments. The gaps, we know what the estate is, we know that there's 1,160 schools out there, we know that it's complex, it's dispersed, it's geographically dispersed, we have 5 sectors. We manage those gaps by engaging regularly with the various sectoral bodies in terms of bringing forward our programmes. We identify the need and we try and make best use of the capital that we have available to us within that. So that's how we're essentially managing the gaps, by bringing forward the various programme streams. Now, obviously, an overarching strategy will look to harness that in a more strategic form, and that will not only, as the points have been made earlier there, that will not only help inform what our programmes are moving forward, but maybe necessarily what a restructure may look like in terms of our delivery and capacity to actually deliver what's there within the bounds of the budget envelope that is available to us.
We're sitting 15 years without an overarching strategy. What has been the hindrances actually to bring us forward a strategy, or to draw up a strategy to overarch the whole thing? Well, what has hindered the department in doing that?
Well, I think the issue for us at the moment that we have inherited here is the resource issue, and I know I keep talking about resource, and I did say I'm not here to make excuses, but I have to be honest with the committee in terms of the constraints that we're operating within. Now, I'm not saying that's the reason for the entire 10 years, but I think certainly in recent years it has been a major factor, and I think we're now trying to put that right within the resource that we currently have, which is very difficult.
Yeah, and work's ongoing on that, and we're hoping to see something on this overarching strategy fairly soon. Yes. Okay. We're aware, and I'm sure you're aware too, of material that's been published by the UK Government's Department for Education, providing comprehensive guidance on how to manage a school's estate. It's the Good Estates Management for Schools. Mm-hmm. Why hasn't the department implemented something similar to this in Northern Ireland, which would have been, I'm sure, a help in the situation that we find ourselves in?
Well, I think there's no doubt that it's a very useful document, and I think, as the Audit Office report indicates, we do follow many of the practices in the document, but you're right to say we don't have a document similar to that here. Stephen is working, as I said earlier, to put the strategy together. I think the strategy will be our GEMS type document moving forward, but we are following many of the practices within that document, as the report indicates. But we don't have the document. Yep.
If I could just add to that, we're grateful for the Audit Office to have brought the good estate management guidance to our attention. When it was, we examined it obviously, and there are components which the audit report actually does acknowledge. There are components of it, a good number of components that we do actually have in train and in place. Some are out of date and need reviewed, like information in regard to the actual estate itself and understanding of the estate in that regard. We are examining that. We're also examining strategies in other jurisdictions and in other organisations to ensure that what we're bringing forward meets our requirements, because GEMS is related to DFA in England and it's for their purposes. We, obviously there's aspects of it we already have in train, as Ronnie has referenced. The Minister agreed a vision for the school estate, he agreed a mission for the school estate. We are in year 3 of our improving the information we have of the estate, year 3 of 5. In terms of the conditions surveys, and we're soon to embark into the suitability surveys. So really, in terms of other guidance as well, we need to actually harness what we've got out there. We need to review it in terms of its currency and bring it together perhaps into a singular platform where it's, like security in schools is maybe located here. Does anybody know where to find that type of thing? So it's the estate strategy is going to be quite far-reaching in terms of what it's going to actually. It'll really make us look at ourselves and focus on not only what we've got, what we need to refresh, but what we haven't got and what we need to put in place. And we'll be doing that between now and the autumn in an initial draft, with a view to getting that finalised, as I say, in the third quarter of this financial year. That'll be early 2026.
What's the lack then, the lack of a strategy, overarching strategy being in place, which has maybe taken the focus away a bit from new builds and maintenance and all that? Is that what has caused the 15-year maintenance backlog that you talked about, Ronnie, in your opening remarks? Or is it the fact that you're saying for the last 15 years the estates or the school's estates hasn't been properly funded? Which is it?
I think it's probably a bit of both, to be honest, but primarily I think it's about the funding issue, and that's where we've seen the backlog year on year growing, and it's still growing. So that's the major challenge for us. We do have an ageing estate, so I don't think any of us should be surprised at the maintenance issues that are arising. We don't have the resource to address that as quickly as we would like, but that's not to take away from the fact that having an overarching strategy would be beneficial for us. I'm not trying to row back from that, but primarily the issue, if we're honest about it, is around the resource.
Thank you, Phil.
Thank you.
Just a very brief question from me, following on from Tom. Why has the Asset Management Forum not met since 2019?
I think, again, the issue has been around personnel. I think it absolutely should have been meeting, but it's been a strain, and I think things have fallen by the wayside. But we are and will reintroduce those meetings again.
Yeah, I'm just a bit concerned about a theme that's emerging, in terms of various relevant groups not meeting, the governance oversight group not meeting, and now this Asset Management Forum hasn't met since 2019. Is it the case, Ronnie, that the department has been asleep at the wheel when it comes to this issue?
No, I don't think it's fair to say the department has been asleep at the wheel. There have been many meetings, many forums, many groups that are meeting from a very senior level down, but those two that you have referred to have not been meeting, and they should have been, but we are putting them back in place.
Right, saying they have an important role and function when it comes to tackling the problem we're discussing today?
I absolutely accept they have an important role and function, as do many of the other groups that are meeting, but yeah.
So if they weren't meeting, and I've heard so far in response to some of the questions that we've had, we are looking at, we are planning to, are those just words of comfort to this committee to get past today, Ronnie, or is there a very serious commitment to addressing this very serious problem? I'm very concerned that these two groups have not been meeting. Once since 2019, that's 6 years ago. 6 years ago.
And I share that concern, Chair, and I would want to give you an assurance that these are not words to get through the committee today. They are very real, very live issues for me as accounting officer and permanent secretary, they are issues that I'm giving the committee an assurance that will be dealt with, and these meetings will be back in place. I think we do need, as both Richard and I have said, to look at the terms of reference. I think things need to be much sharper, and I think the fact that in terms of the oversight group, that I'm taking responsibility to chair that group is an indication of how serious I see this, and the determination on my part and on Richard's and on others around the table to drive this forward as quickly as we can.
Ronnie, I'm just still not clear as to why the Asset Management Forum hasn't met in 6 years. Why has it not met?
Well, I haven't been there for the entire 6 years, but my understanding of that is it's been around the resource issue, that the group fell by the wayside. I think some of the work is being picked up in other forums at our meeting, but that's not to say that we shouldn't have a dedicated focus on asset management.
Whose responsibility was it to ensure that group was meeting, that forum was meeting?
Well, I take responsibility as a permanent secretary to ensure the group is meeting, and I'm now taking steps to make sure that is put back in place as quickly as possible.
Or are you saying your predecessor failed in that regard?
I'm not saying that people failed. I think there are very real reasons why these things didn't happen, and it's not easy, I think, for us to put some of these things back in place. It's another demand on the time of people like Stephen and others, but I think it's absolutely the right thing to do, and that's why we're doing it. But I'm not here today to blame anybody for what has happened. I think there's a collective responsibility, and I take that responsibility at this point in time, and
yes,
I'm doing something about it.
The buck stops with the permanent secretary that's responsible, and I don't buy this wider collective responsibility stuff when things aren't being done. The buck has to stop somewhere. This group hasn't been meeting. The whole system has fallen apart. Maintenance is not. There's huge issues, and in truth, it is an unforgivable situation. Unforgivable. It's unacceptable as well. What problems have emerged as a result of those groups not meeting?
Well, first of all, can I say
They worsened the situation?
I'm not here saying that it is acceptable. I'm accepting that responsibility and saying they should have been meeting. I think we will undoubtedly have lost some coordination, I think. But overall, at the end of the day, whether the groups are meeting or the groups aren't meeting, and I think they should be, we still have the insurmountable issue around, the lack of resource to do what we're trying to do. We're spreading ourselves and the funding we have very thinly, and I think we are paying a price for it. We are undoubtedly paying a price for that.
I think our school children and our teachers in schools are paying the price for it.
Well, I think collectively we are, and I've said at the very start, Chair, I paid tribute to our school leaders and our teachers. I think they're doing a fantastic job in very, very difficult circumstances. But I also think that the people who are working for Richard and I on these issues are working extremely hard to try and deliver the best service they can, and I think that is very challenging for them, and we shouldn't overlook that.
We're not overlooking it. It's the reason we're having this inquiry, and it's the reason why I'm deeply disturbed by some of the details that are emerging and have emerged to date. Paying tribute to teachers and school children and the environment that they're expected to teach and children be educated in is one thing, but actually doing something about it is entirely another. And for too long, they've heard, from what I can see, countless excuses and failings from the part of the department and other relevant bodies such as the Education Authority in that regard. It is unacceptable. Unacceptable. I'm going to move on. Cathal Boylan.
Even you want to come in on?
Okay,
Even briefly, yeah.
I'll keep it very brief. Minister, there's, it is an issue of capacity in terms of why that meeting hasn't met, but many of the aspects that will be covered in that meeting are covered at many of the other fora that Ronnie has referred. So I don't want the chair of the committee to think that many of those issues were not being examined and reported on to the top level of the department and to the minister. For example, we have an asset management plan in place which sets out the broad structure of what you would expect in that asset management forum. With funding and budget issues, we have capital and maintenance investment capital and maintenance investment, meetings that happen quarterly, where we do examine budget and we thoroughly test. We engage, working closely with the EA in that aspect. We look at our broad capital investment programme. We have regular meetings in that regard. Now, okay, the CPOG didn't happen since last year because of severe capacity issues within the department. Looking at existing assets, we have embarked on the refresh of the condition and suitability surveys. We've already covered that to keep it brief. Future demand for assets, we are acutely aware, working closely with our sectors, what their needs are. They are best placed to actually determine and identify for us, and they regularly bring that to our attention. We meet, for example, I meet with CCMS on a monthly basis. I meet with my colleagues in the Education Authority. We meet with the Irish medium sector regularly. I just didn't want to leave it hanging that absolutely nothing is being done. There are many parts of that asset management forum that we pick up in other meetings and other groupings, right up to and including departmental board, top management group, including risk and control in terms of the ARAC meeting, the audit risk and assessment meeting. So thank you for
I appreciate the clarification, Stephen, but basically what I'm hearing before I move on to Cahill is that these problems have been dealt with in other ways, that basically no problems have emerged. So if that is the case in the absence of those groups meeting, are those groups unnecessary then?
sorry.
No, I don't think those groups are unnecessary. I think what both Stephen and I are saying is, look, we've faced a challenging position. I think the department has tried to do things in the best way it could with the resources it had. We're picking up things and as I said, and as Stephen has elaborated on in other meetings. But I do come back to the point I made earlier. I think having those groups back in place is timely and is appropriate and is something that we want to do. Sorry, Stephen.
One brief point on that. One of the tasks that Ronnie has given us within the division is to actually look at those groups as part of the overarching estate strategy, as part of the reconstitution of the capital programme oversight group, to see whether the roles and responsibilities of those groupings should be officially subsumed within the CPOG.
Okay, thanks both. Cahill, Boylan.
Thank you, Chair. I'd just like to welcome Ahmed Carlisle, who's joined us here in work experience, and to see the work of the committee as well. Gentlemen, thank you very much for coming, and thank you for presenting to us. The Audit Office report sets out that over the next number of years there are PFA assets returning. Can you confirm that the Department will be properly prepared for the return of those PFA assets, and have you explored whether you can reallocate the savings from the PFA contract's unitary payments to address the maintenance needs of the estate?
If I can maybe open with a comment and then ask maybe EA colleagues just to elaborate on that, and then I'll come back to the funding issue if that's okay with you. Yes, I am confident that there is a huge amount of work that's going on in order to prepare for those assets coming back to us. I think EA is doing considerable work. I mean, there's ongoing work around maintenance and inspection, but there is a huge amount of work, including I think you have a programme board in place to oversee the transfer back of these issues. So I don't know, Richard or Paul, maybe you want to comment a wee bit more?
I'll say something by way of the sort of the overview approach. This is a really crucial issue in terms of these assets coming to us. So the first one returns later this year, Drumglass School. So a board has been established which brings together all the relevant interests and perspectives, and that the key is to make sure that at the point of asset transfer it's in the condition it should be as specified by the contract. Now, I think what we need to recognise is there were a number of PFI contracts. There was some learning took place as that went through. I suspect, and Paul may add to the detail of this, we may find that for the first ones coming back, the contractual requirements weren't drafted as tightly as we now would like them to be in terms of how we determine the condition of the asset as it comes back. That will evolve as further contracts come back. Before I ask Paul just to talk about the detail of that work, it's also important to recognise that, subject to the caveats about the contract, the asset will come back to us in a fully maintained state, because the contract specified that part of the unitary payment was to cover maintenance. the next day it will start to deteriorate because it moves from a situation of being fully funded for maintenance to being completely unfunded, particularly for proactive maintenance. So it will start deteriorating. The advantage, and just to pull out this information, I thought it would be useful for the committee. If I take Antrim Grammar School as a comparator, it was built around about 2004 conventionally, so roughly just over 20 years ago. It's sitting today with a backlog maintenance figure of £253 million. Sorry, £253,000. So there's a conventional school that's sitting with £250,000 worth of backlog maintenance. The PPP schools, when they come back, will have nothing, but they will start ticking towards that. Paul, do you want to say something just about the process?
Yeah, Cal, that we have a project team in place to support those schools. So it really includes DE, the schools that are involved in it, the EA directorates and internal audit. So my role in FM is to have that transition as smooth as possible to their support the schools in that regard. So it's really around the issues of cleaning and catering, but also my colleagues, there's a PPP unit within ICD, and they would ensure that there's a due diligence around inspections of the schools and condition reports, and working with the contractor before it's handed back that it's in the condition that we would expect it to be. But that whole transition through the project board is currently being handled, and at this stage we're working with Drumglass High School.
And how does that marry up then? Obviously budgets and resources are tight. So have you worked that out in terms of once that transfer comes over? Because I'll be concerned then where it goes there in terms of the budget. So is that married up? Is that all? Have you planned it all out?
I think
quantified and qualified?
No. I think that work is planning for the run up to the handover. At the point it's handed over, it becomes an asset we own with nothing available to us specifically for maintenance. So effectively it transitions overnight from fully funded for maintenance to nothing at all.
I appreciate it, but I'm asking what happens in the future, but that's...
No, in the future it will start to accumulate a backlog maintenance the way all our current conventional schools are doing, unless the landscape changes.
No, 100%, but it's all qualified and quantified in terms of figures and everything else that goes with it, yeah. Part of the plan overall.
Part of the main focus of the planning is to make sure it comes over with a figure that is zero, because the contract requires that the school is properly maintained throughout the lifetime of that contract. So the problems arise post it, but you're absolutely right. There's a job of work for us to do to make sure that those contractual obligations are fulfilled.
And that's what I'm trying to get at. Moving on, second question. Ronnie, according to the Audit Office in 2017-18, you estimated the maintenance backlog at around 300 million. Now you believe it is to be 450 million. But this is based on outdated information. What specific action is the department taking to accurately quantify, prioritise and address the significant maintenance backlog?
Okay, I mean, in terms of the maintenance backlog, you're right. That's what we estimated, and that figure is developing. And we talked earlier about EA undertaking condition surveys. So I think it's fair to say there were about 39-40% of those done so far, and I think the estimate as a result of that is around 233 million. So when you extrapolate that out, I think our estimate is the figure is no longer 450, but it's probably now around 700 million. And that's on the basis of the work that's been done. Now we can't be absolutely sure until all of that work is complete, but there's some way to go before we're in that position. So we are still estimating this, but the figure is undoubtedly rising.
Substantially.
Very substantially, yeah.
Major job.
But I think we are getting a bit more of a grip in terms of our understanding of it. But the outcome of that is that yes, it's substantially increasing.
And just my final question, the department has responsibilities under the climate change legislation and more widely has a part to play in the executive's vision of net zero carbon emissions. Is the department developing clear and realistic plans for its estate to ensure it can meet its statutory responsibilities under the climate change legislation?
We are certainly working towards that, but again, we're in that position where it's extremely challenging. So if we were retrofitting, for example, it would cost us, I think the figure is somewhere in the region of 2 billion to retrofit schools with all of the disruption. Now we don't have that funding, and we're not, I think, likely to get that funding. But we are working toward it. I'm going to ask Stephen maybe to give you a bit more of the detail in terms of what we're doing.
Yeah, we're actually looking at this in several areas. We're looking at new builds to make sure that all our new builds in design, particularly from 2020 and the more recent 2022 schemes, from the earliest stage design, have the carbon requirements in line with the regulations built in, and that's in terms of energy usage, carbon heat loss, etc. All of that will be built in, and the consultant teams will be challenged to ensure that that is built in from the earliest stage. Our measures for that are largely based on statutory measures like BREEAM in terms of the environmental assessments that are carried out on every project. You mentioned retrofit. Retrofit is going to be quite difficult because of the age of the estate in terms of the upheaval and the amount of money. The 2 billion is an extremely broad estimate from our professional colleagues, nothing more than that, because we haven't actually got into a very detailed examination of what would be required. But as part of that retrofit, what we are actually looking to develop is a pilot programme where we can look at what measures can we take to immediately address, through small scale investment in, say, insulation on a pilot number of schemes, double glazing, etc. But what we need to do, and working closely with the EA colleagues on the work that they've been doing in terms of developing systems for the metrics, because we need to actually be able to measure the as is, do some work, and what have we benefited from it. So we need to actually get some traction on those metrics as well. So we are working on this quite proactively. In fact, the EA colleagues, Paul in particular, has been working on a number of pilot exercises to improve our metrics, because we have building energy management systems in many of our schools, and we need to see how are they operating, are they giving us the most reliable information that we need to actually make the best judgment as to what work needs to be taken forward. I suppose it could be an element of low-lying fruit to get that quickly and then see what longer term investment, but certainly in our new builds moving forward for those laterally announced ones, because some of our new builds are so far advanced in design with planning approval in place or on site that to actually make the changes to those would cost significant sums of capital and lead to further delay on much needed investment in the school estate.
Slightly concerned, Stephen, that we're talking about 2 billion here and we don't really know.
No.
Do you know what I mean? And that's slightly concerning for all of us collectively. And I mean, obviously, as part of this inquiry and part of this report, to try and tease that out. I mean, my final point on that there, I mean, is there any, I mean, clearly, it's not for me to say you're doing it, but clearly there's enough evidence out there for now, or is there not enough evidence, or is there any other research avenues we can get to try and qualify and quantify the figure? That's my question, yes. So.
Yeah, I mean, Paul may want to comment on that in terms of the detail of the work he's doing.
We have been trying to reach out because in the absence of funding to bring this forward, we have been successful in our SBRI projects, which is Small Business Research Initiatives. So we've looked at working with 12 schools, the most energy deficient schools across the province. So we've looked at platform development, historical data capture, data analysis to inform future investment, engagement with the school leaders, and what that SBRI project, what has come out of that. In 2025 we have developed a climate platform solution that will allow us to capture data out there in schools. So that's one thing that we've reached out on and developed. I suppose it's important to say that we have a small team within energy and EA, and what we do on a daily basis is we reach out to schools around their energy and hoping that we will support them in making savings. So I'm just looking through the figures here, and we have we aim to reduce the consumption by a minimum of 5% each year for the next 3 years. So that'll equate to an estimated saving of 245,000. I think another important for the committee is that from April 2021 to March 2025, we have had cost avoidance measures of approximately 4.3 million. So that's been solely in supporting schools around their energy bills, around things like hedging, risk management ban of energy and natural gas, and things like that. So I think the point I'm trying to make is, Cahill, in the absence of funding, we're not standing still. Yeah. We're trying to work through community plan with councils. We're doing the hedging of electricity, and we're doing the SBRI to have a platform where we can capture the data and be ready when funding becomes available.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Cahill. I just want to jump back slightly to the discussion around the PFA assets returning, and I'm not sure if we caught it as a committee, but has it been explored, Ronnie, as to whether you can reallocate the savings from the PFA contracts to address the maintenance needs of that particular estate?
I mean, I couldn't today, Chair, give a guarantee on that. I mean, and certainly we will make the case if there is funding that can be reallocated to do that, but I couldn't.
Whose decision is it?
I couldn't give that commitment today. Well, that will be for Richard, myself, and our teams to look at and come to a decision on.
Coalition of the willing. You know, there's a solution there. If there's going to be a saving from the contract cost to reallocate those funds, that will resolve the problem in terms of the maintenance gap.
Would we have to look at the other competing demands as well? But
yes,
certainly
I get
it's something that we would look at.
If we're saying on one hand that there's serious issues and concerns for the state of the school estate, and these particular buildings have benefited from exceptional maintenance throughout the contract term, surely a way of preventing the problem getting bigger is to reallocate the contract costs by whatever percentage to ensure the maintenance of the building continues so it doesn't dilapidate.
And we would certainly look at that, but you know, I have to look at all of these things in the wider scheme of the resource pressures that we're facing as a department. So, for example, you know, we have a huge deficit, so we would want to look at what's the best way to use it. But I'm not saying that's not the way.
Ronnie, I would be surprised in your role if this is the first time you've been asked this question. So, can you just cut to the point? Is it the case that you aren't going to relocate those funds, or it's going to fall into the problem as the rest? You know, it's a straightforward enough question.
I think the real risk is that it will fall into the same problem as the rest.
Right.
But we will look, you know, we will look at all options available to us at that time and make a decision. But I think both Richard and I have been clear that, you know, there is a risk that the schools when they return will undoubtedly go into the same pot as everybody else. Yeah.
So the message to Drumglass, for instance, on that basis will be that when the PFA contract ends, you're going to be facing the same problem as all of the other schools' estates that we have concerns about.
And I think Richard was very open in saying that that's the position.
That's not solution focused, though. There is obviously some clear solution here if the contract cost will be ultimately saved or returned centrally to yourselves. Surely that can be reallocated in a discussion with yourselves to prevent this problem getting worse.
Chair, I think you're absolutely right. There is a very clear solution available. Unfortunately, there are many, many problems, all actively trying to grab that solution. I mean, if you take Drumglass, I mean, I don't know the example, but it's very, very likely that today in Drumglass there are some pupils going through a statementing process that will require classroom assistance to be allocated to them. I don't have the money for that. As things stand at the moment this year, I'm the thick end of £300 million short of achieving financial break-even, and that's £300 million short of addressing all the priorities across the education sector, many of them supporting the most vulnerable children through their education journey. So these are, you know, it would be lovely to be able to take this money and put it into maintenance, but there are other problems that at the time we will need to speak to the Minister about to see in the context of his broader priorities. How do we make the best use of that money?
I'm conscious of the wider challenges that face the education sector. There's a wide variety of issues there, but this inquiry is focused on the school's estate and its condition. And what you're telling me today, after outlining all of the things that you're wanting to do, thinking about doing, have tried to do, that the schools that have been maintained exceptionally well will not be maintained to the same standard, if at all, when the PFA contract ends. That does not sound to me like a commitment to address a very serious rot in the school estate.
But we're not just simply trying to address the rot in a small number of schools that are within the PFI. We're trying to address the rot in all schools. And, you know, to use your Drumglass example, when it's handed over, it'll be handed over in a very good state. We have lots and lots of schools that are not in that. So, you know, for us to sit and say today we would allocate that money to ensuring Drumglass didn't fall into the same situation as everybody else, I think would be quite hard for all those other schools to take. So we're trying to find a balance here that allows us to do what we can and to be fair to as many people as we can.
How many schools are currently under PFI contract, and how many of them are due to end in the next 2 years?
It's about 20.
I think it's about 20 or so.
We have nine PFI contracts, and that covers 20 schools. I would have to come back to you with the analysis. I have a table which gives the return date, the end contract date, but I would need to actually come back to you separately.
What's the usual, just for public records, the usual term of a contract, time-wise?
25 years.
25 years. Okay. And just a bit of devil's advocate in relation to this, do you see the PFI arrangement as a solution to the maintenance problems with our schools?
Sorry, just point of clarification. 2 of them are 30 years, the remainder are 25. Sorry, forgive me on that.
Do you see the model of the PFI contract as a solution to, I suppose, avoid the problems that we have with the school estate over a 25-year or 30-year period?
It is obviously it's a Treasury requirement that PFI still has to be considered as one of the options for moving forward with capital as well as conventional procurement and strategic partnering. If I was to be honest, it is an expensive solution. It spreads it over a 25-year period when you look at those unitary costs, and they are a pressure on the resource DEL as opposed to a hit on the capital for the 2 years of the construction of a conventionally built school. So obviously in any case moving forward and within the estate strategy, that is something we will have to seriously look at, because you may be aware that the former Belfast board did examine the possibility of more strategic partnering, which was a PPP rather than a PFI. PFI is like an individual contract. PPP is a broader, almost like a framework delivery. These will be looked at within the estate strategy, Chair.
Okay, that's good to know. Just finally, before I move on, I do have a concern just in response to what Ronnie, what you and Richard have both said, that there's various competing priorities and issues and challenges that exist. But the truth is, we don't know what those priorities are, where money needs or should be allocated, because there's no overall strategic plan. So we're really running around a bit headless in that regard.
I wouldn't accept we're running around headless. I think it's right to say that we don't have all of the information that we need or would like to have. I think we are certainly working to try and develop that. But there are huge competing demands, Chair. I mean, we can't get away from that. That's the reality of what we're trying to deal with.
The role of this committee is to ensure good value for public money. In the absence of that plan, how do we ensure that resources are going to the right places and that the public are getting value for public money?
Well, I think when you look at a lot of the individual work we're doing around the programmes and projects, all of those, Chair, will be underpinned by value for money requirements in terms of business cases. We're following all of our procurement responsibilities. We're doing all of those things in terms of delivering a value for money. I absolutely accept in terms of the information we need to get that in order to give further assurance, but I wouldn't want the committee thinking that we're not delivering value for money in a huge amount of the work that we are doing, because I think we are through the processes that are in place.
You believe we're getting good value for money in terms of the maintenance of the school estate, given there's no plan?
I think that's extremely challenging, sir. I think you wanted to come in, Richard.
I think, Chair, I mean, if you define value for money as, the last valuation of the school's estate from LPS, I think, was something of the order of £4.3 billion. Are we properly getting value for money from a £4.3 billion asset? Absolutely not. Nobody can say that. The way you get value for money from that estate is to properly maintain it and maintain a world-class educational environment for children to go to school every day. But if I take that on, then we're progressing to an end stage where we will achieve that through the condition surveys. We're 39% through a 5-year programme. But the sad reality is, even having 39% of it completed, that 39% surveys that we have is not going to influence £1 of spending this year, next year, or the year after, because we don't have any money available for preventative maintenance. We don't have any money available to start dealing with the backlog maintenance. The only maintenance spend we're doing at the moment is reactive maintenance, which is just about keeping schools open. So it's really important we do that work and we have that analysis. If nothing else, it will help sharpen the bid that the Minister can submit to the Executive. But so it's not undermining value for money, because we're not spending any money on a flawed basis in the absence of that information at this stage.
David Honeyford.
A couple of questions, but I want to pick up on something. You answered Daniel with a question earlier on, and he was asking you about this maintenance, and you answered by saying, what are we trying to achieve? Now, if you don't know what you're trying to achieve, why are we even having this inquiry? If that basic question has been asked in a statement of what are you trying to achieve and what do we do about it, how would you know what to do about it if you don't know what you're trying to achieve? So what are you trying to, what is the answer?
I think, and apologies if I was confusing, I wasn't posing a question to the Chair. What I was saying was the way we are going forward is, rather than just continue with process that existed in the past, right, our approach, and it goes way beyond the maintenance issue. Ronnie and I are having these conversations about every area that our organisations need to work on. We start by posing ourselves the question, what is it we're trying to achieve, and how do we design a method of engagement, a method of dialogue, and a process that will actually take us to that strategic ambition. I think in the past, I can point, and it goes to the Chair's points about some of the engagement fora that don't meet. I think if we're honest, we would really struggle to articulate what is that forum trying to achieve. We need to be better at that before we go forward. So it was more
honestly sitting listening. The 15 years we're looking at, you're struggling to deliver what you've actually done for 15 years as two departments, honestly. And the bit when you said about teachers doing a very difficult job, challenging environment, or they deserve better, I could hear the screaming of teachers and principals in my own area screaming that the problem with this is sitting in front of us in the two departments. And honestly, frankly, to talk about people, we want to let people be free to think differently. I'm quoting you now, people need to be freed up, we need a change of culture. Does that equate right down to the schools, that you'll free them up to allow them to actually deliver maintenance and things in their own premises without having to be regulated by and controlled by your departments?
I mean, what I would say is that the screaming and frustration that principals will understandably do, I have colleagues across Education Authority, and there's colleagues in the Department of Education are equally screaming in frustration. Personally, I think it would be much, much more difficult for Ronnie and I to sit here today to say we had £100 million maintenance budget and we only were able to spend 80 of it, and we didn't know how to spend the other 20, or we didn't know where to spend it. The frustration at the moment is every penny that is allocated to us for maintenance is spent, spent well. It is not a case that schools are saying that's broken and you need to fix it, and we're saying no, we're not going to bother.
No, but what is happening is the school have raised money, or parents have raised money to raise and to fix stuff, and you're preventing that fix because you're forcing it through your own budgets and everything else, rather than leaving them free. So you talk, and I appreciate it, I nearly thought it was William Wallace coming through, but about freedom and changing culture and everything else. And if that's the case, I welcome that. Mm-hmm. But what I'm asking is, does that go down to the principals of a school to allow them the freedom, to allow them to maintain their own buildings at cost-effective solutions, rather than being curtailed? And I could name many examples that they're actually costing more to the school, and you're preventing maintenance.
Well, there's two elements to this. So there's what's called landlord maintenance and tenant maintenance. So this is the tenant maintenance bit of it, because the landlord is our responsibility. We have heard, and I've heard for the last 12 months loud and clear, principals saying it's deeply frustrating that if I want a classroom painted, if I go through the EA framework contract, it's going to cost £2,000 and I have to wait 6 weeks. There's a guy down the street who'll do it for 250 quid. Can we not just go ahead? That's the frustration that we have heard. We're putting in place, because we want to test that, because I honestly think there are two sides to that. Some schools I mean, and I was out with one school, and they used school funds to buy some equipment. The equipment then became faulty, and the vice principal spent a huge amount of time over an elongated period arguing with the supplier, and ultimately the supplier walked away and said, no, we're not standing over that. If that had been an EA contract with our purchasing power, we would have got it refunded and replaced. But we're putting in place a pilot for decorating and floor covering, which will give the schools exactly the flexibility that you talk about. And that, do you want to say a bit more?
Yeah, I would also say I understand the frustration of school leaders. A lot of it's around term service contract and what's delivered out to schools, and that's been very challenging. The term service contract is a historic contract. We're currently went out to the market. We're currently working our way through. We've allotted contracts out to a brand new term service contract, and that will be across 18 lots, across 9 regions for building and 9 for M&E. So that'll be a completely new change. The point I'm getting to is, and I'll go back to Richard's point about the delegated maintenance partner schools, is if we can get this term service contract right, because it's all about key performance indicators, financial penalties, responsiveness, then my role is to make it easier for school leaders not to worry about maintenance. And I worry about school leaders wanting delegated maintenance responsibilities, because that's my responsibility. So if I can fix the responsiveness, the value for money, those elements, we're already seeing with the new contracts in place, principals saying, can I have more of that as part of the tenant responsibility? Now the next bit to add to Richard's is, we're currently working through a process where we will delegate maintenance to schools. So that will be about floor coverings and it will be about painting. So that those two elements are interlinked, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I'll go to Ronnie, but Richard just said if he had 100 million and we were arguing over where we're putting money, but there's such poor data within the estate. Do you actually even understand the estate?
I think we do understand the estate, and yes, we lack a huge amount of data, as you point out, but that's not to say that there isn't a significant amount of data that EA ourselves hold, which gives us an understanding. We certainly want to be more proactive. We want to gather that data. The condition surveys, I think, have helped with that to an extent, and that's work that is ongoing, and we certainly want to get to a position where we're more preventative than reactive. But that, if I'm honest, is going to be a long way away. But if you look at sort of a number of other areas, I mean, for example, major works and SEPs, which aren't, we would contend reactive. You know, we do have very significant up-to-date data. When you look at sort of, you know, the sort of new builds and areas like that, you know, we do have lots. We are out there gathering data through EA, but I can't not accept that, you know, we do need a system in place that allows us to have much better data. That's what the report says, and we absolutely accept that.
Why isn't there a system in place?
Sorry,
why isn't there a system in place? Why? Everything that's been said, and this is becoming a habit within this, everything's been said is we're going to do. Everything's future tense. And so why hasn't this happened?
Because we haven't had the resource to do it, and you know, that's the issue that we keep coming. You know, the committee may not accept that, but that's the reality of it. That, you know, we're firefighting. We are trying to do as much as we reasonably can, but we haven't had the funding available to address a lot of these issues. Sorry, Steve.
Going back historically, we have had data in place. As I referenced earlier, the Education and Library Boards carried out the condition and suitability surveys. But, David, the problem was in the very constrained resource environment and budget environment that we operated in. It was unfortunately one of the victims that was not able to be funded. As a result, the data we had became out of date and stale to some extent, but it was still there. As Ronnie has referenced, before we bring forward any of our major programmes, whether it's the major capital works or the SEP, School Enhancement Programme, fresh surveys were undertaken to make sure that we were actually basing our scoring on the most accurate and up-to-date information in terms of both the condition and suitability, and other metrics like insufficient outdoor space, over-reliance on modular accommodation and things like that.
I don't get the resource bit, honestly. So what changed? Did people lose their jobs? Was there, or where did the information come from? So how do you collate the data? Sorry, how do you collate the data? If you're talking about there's poor data in the state, how is that collated now, and how is that any different than 10 years ago, 15 years ago, 20 years ago?
Well, Paul will probably talk to this better than I, but the department has earmarked funding over the last 2 years. This is the third year of that, of 500k in any given year, to fund the condition surveyors. They're professionally qualified EA operatives who will go out across all schools in the estate and carry out condition surveys. Those condition surveys are quite comprehensive in terms of the building fabric, the outdoor space. They also get into the detail of
They've been there for 3 years. How many schools have they covered?
In the 3 years?
39% of them.
39%, I think it's 200.
You've data on 39-40%.
Correct.
Right, so the data is remaining on. So then, talk us through the condition service. Talk us through how that works on the condition surveys.
Ask Paul maybe to do the detail.
The condition survey is essentially where we have an internal team in AA, professional qualified team that goes out to schools and reports on the fabric of the building. So there's two elements of surveys that we do. There's statutory surveys that we do to keep schools safe, know that the pupils are safe, and then the element is the condition. Now, for me in maintenance, we have no budget for planned maintenance. So the condition survey is the element where we plan ahead and we identify where the issues are at schools, and that's where the planned maintenance will be further down the road. Well, you were asking, David, about where the data goes. We do have a system, Manhattan, in EA, and that data is recorded within that. That licence for Manhattan will expire in March 26. So we've gone out to market and we've procured an IT company that we're setting up an integrated management work system. So we're moving forward in that. Now, you will say to me, well, what does that mean? We're joining up the dots between asset management, maintenance in the first phase, and that will then report out to schools. There will be live reporting to schools, and even in the surveys that we do or the maintenance that we do at the minute, that is live reporting with maintenance into our current system. So there is an evolution there of what we are trying to do around the systems of recording data. For my colleagues in the department, they are on that project board for the integrated management work system, and there is a timeline set aside for the department will have access to this system. So we're not standing still. There will be a point in time, March 26, where there'll be a complete new suite of data information management for maintenance and asset management. Then shortly after that, we will be bringing the department in. That would be a joined up approach with the department.
The Audit Office report identified there was only elements in poor condition, so it was health and safety and issues when that was the case. Is that still the case?
Absolutely. On the condition surveys, all that we can react to at the minute is critical issues around keeping children safe for those condition surveys.
It also said that work been done and the buildings wasn't been kept in line with industrial standards or industry standards. Why not?
Well, again, we haven't stood still there. We have the priority within the budget, the current budget, first and foremost, is statutory inspections. That's 39 disciplines around what we need within the legislation to keep children safe. So that's our first priority before we do anything, is statutory inspections. So that is done, and then what comes out of that through a small element of our current budget and then the capital budget is statutory remedial works. So that's always the strap line, and all we can work at in the minute is keeping children safe and schools open. So that is something that we didn't do 5 years ago. And statutory inspections, there were 70% within those 39 disciplines weren't carried out. As of this year, we have reduced that down to 12%, and we hope in year to reduce that down to a low single figure of 4 to 5%.
Why are the industry standards not being met within the builds of schools?
Within the builds of schools?
Within the maintenance and everything. Why is industry standards not been kept within the state of education?
I maybe come in briefly on that. When we were developing the approach for the refresh of the condition surveys, we had various workshops, and these workshops are continuing to develop what we needed within the department to come from those, what the Education Authority needed rather than what the industry needed. We had professional colleagues who were involved in all of those discussions in terms of what would be surveyed, how it would be surveyed, what information would then be extrapolated down into giving us the costings that come out of this to bring the particular school up to a safe, acceptable standard. So we have more of a bespoke approach rather than an industry standard, because there's many aspects of, if you looked at an industry standard, that we wouldn't be using. So again, in the restricted resource environment that we're in, we wanted to target the resources best we can and assure the most efficient surveys we could get.
Okay, David, thanks very much. Deanne Forsyth.
Thank you, and thank you all very much for coming and speaking to this today. And Ronnie in particular, thanks for being up front and welcoming the report on these issues. It's really important to me as a mum of three children who attend two schools that are both in desperate need of investment. Paul's nodding because he's been out at them with me, and as a representative of South Down, part of rural Northern Ireland, where a lot of the schools feel very much left behind. But to the point on data, just given that there's inadequate data on the state of the schools here, how do you effectively advise the Minister as to which schools are most in need of new builds and therefore where the capital spend would provide the most value for money?
Yeah.
I mean, we do have a system in place and a scoring mechanism in place in order to do that. So, there's a comprehensive programme. I'm going to ask Stephen maybe just to talk you through, if that's okay, Diane, the detail of that.
I'll keep it very brief. I'm happy to come back with more information as you need afterwards. Since 2012, we've had 6 major works announcements, which has created a programme of 104 new build schools at varying stages. 40 of them are complete. We have a protocol for selection, and it's based on a call to the school authorities. It's important that we engage with the school authorities because they know their estates best, they know their priorities for their estates, and they know where the need rests. They engage directly with their various principals and school leaders. So we feel that is an essential part of the process, to issue a call there. The cohort of schools that come in is then subject to a gateway stage. We introduced the gateway stage in 2014 because we found in 2012 and partly in 2013 we were having a number of schools that still had outstanding area planning issues, like development proposals still in train, which was meaning before we could even understand what are we being asked to bring forward, what size of school, where is it likely to be, that process was still out working. One of the gateways criteria is there any sustainability issues, or is there any outstanding area planning issues? Another thing we introduced in the gateway was, have you got a SEP, a school enhancement programme? That's significant investment from the public purse. So is it fair for someone to have SEP investment and then still be able to get into major works? We then move into the scoring frame, and very briefly, those we've talked several times there. Two of the main issues there are your condition and your suitability scores, and those are a relative score. It's a score in both cases 30 points would be available, and it's 0 to 30. For the cohort, someone will get 0, someone will get 30, and the rest will be scored in between that. We look at outdoor space because we listen to our schools, we engage with our school authorities. The protocol is refreshed and reviewed after every call and before the next call. It is endorsed by respective ministers as we move forward. On one occasion it was the permanent secretary that was in place at the time because we didn't have a minister, but in the main it is refreshed and brought up to date. The outdoor space was brought in as a result of one of those refreshes. The over-reliance on modular accommodation was brought in. Also, a previous minister had asked us to bring some more social dynamics in, and that's why we have the scoring for SEN, statemented children, and one of the metrics we use for that is reliance on free school meal uptake in any given school. Boil those all down, and that gives us a prioritised list for that particular call. We then make that, take a submission to the Minister, and it is up to the Minister in terms of the budget that he or she may have available to them at the particular time, how many schools that they would choose to announce. We had hoped to move to small and often in terms of an announcement, so that as projects progressed through the statutory development proposal process, they weren't feeling that they were left for years before they could maybe make a pitch to get onto a major works. And that's what we would still like to do, but we have a bit of a backlog, and we have an extremely constrained capital budget, which means that we have a number of projects that are now going to be stacked and racked at pre-tender stage until the budget becomes available. I hope that's sufficient.
Well, thank you. And we talk about the financial pressures, and new school builds are significant multi-million-pound projects, and it's quite frustrating. In my own locality, where we have schools that are literally falling apart, who have not been approved for new builds. Some have, but have been significantly delayed. They're deteriorating in the meantime, and we also within the constituency very close to those, we have others that are having their second new build within 30 years, and through no fault of their own, in very good schools, but because they're of integrated status. And we've had a perfectly good school demolished in my area, that was in better standard than the controlled and CCMS schools that are awaiting substantial investment. And it just feels very, very unfair, especially whenever you're in a tight budget pressure. And the move now that the money is not ring fenced, and that all schools are put in the same priority list and are all being applied against the criteria which you have set out, do you think that gives a fairer opportunity to schools and in fact promises better value for money on the capital budget?
If I can make a couple of comments, the schools you're referring to were brought forward under the Fresh Start agreement, and that was a separate funding stream, came directly from Westminster, and that was for integrated and shared campuses, and the last few of those are out working at the minute. There were a few that were still in design before the money ran out, and those have now moved into the conventional executive funded major capital works programme, and they'd be treated no differently than any other projects within that programme. As I say, that there was 104 announced through the various calls. There were 11 fresh starts have moved in, so we've now got 114, 115. I would need to just reconfirm that number. Are progressing at different stages. 40 are complete. We have a number on site. We have circa 7 on site. The Minister released a few more last year for us to move to site, and those will be on site before the end of this financial year. And we have others at different stages. In terms of fairness and equity, once they are scored, and they're prioritised on that basis. They're put forward by their respective sector, as I've said. But once we get through the process, we are largely into it's a state of readiness and availability of budget. And what we hope to do, and what our Minister has been able to let us do over the last year or so, is release a number, and that releases the pressure of too many building up at that pre-contract stage. Because if we have too many building up there, we will have to actually look and see how can we justify School X going ahead of School Y when they're all still sitting at that pre-construction stage of process. We also have to be careful that they don't run out of time in terms of planning, business cases, construction cost inflation. All that has to be brought to bear, and the Minister, as you well know, never misses to make the case for increased and sustained investment for the school estate, and that is going to be critical, because I believe that the major works are what make the real difference, because minor works with our reprioritisation down to keeping schools open is nothing but a sticking plaster in terms of, and sometimes sticking plasters on top of sticking plasters on a very aged estate.
Absolutely, and I really welcome the fact that all schools will be assessed against the same criteria rather than some sectors elevated above any others. In terms of the estate management information system, when will there be a comprehensive system in place, and could you give a commitment that it will provide the data you need to better understand and manage the school estate?
I think we're working towards that. I've asked officials to do some work to look at estate management systems elsewhere. I know Stephen has been working with colleagues in the Republic of Ireland in terms of what they have. So we are developing our proposal, we're developing our need. Can I say when exactly? I couldn't give you a precise date, Diane, unfortunately. Again, it'll be resource driven, but Stephen might say a wee bit about the work you're doing with ROI colleagues.
Again, the audit report has brought into clear focus the need for a capital works programme management system. We have a lot of systems in place which are effectively spreadsheet based, and they're very manually based, and that, that's, you'd nearly think that's a bit archaic, but it is what we use both for our financial and programme management and reporting. We do know that colleagues in the EA are examining various systems in that regard. My colleagues in the area planning side have been doing some very good work in terms of looking at GIS, the Geographic Information Systems, and the benefits that can bring. That can bring a whole host of spatial analysis in terms of pupil location, school location, travel to school, all that, which will help very firmly with area planning and, you know, where is the best location for particular schools given the actual catchment. Ronnie references the engagement with the Department of Education in the Republic of Ireland. They have their GIS reaching out to the whole of government systems where they're actually able to bring in planning proposals for housing development and look at their school estate, how that is keeping pace with, if you're going to build 1,000 houses over here, where's the schools? You know, what's the capacity of the schools in that regard? The Capital Works Programme Management System, we take that very firmly from the Audit Office report. We do need to actually corral all these systems, bring them into a singular system that we can have confidence in, that will have reliable, accurate and up-to-date information. We believe our information that we have on all the spreadsheets is that, there's no question, and we report right up to the top of the House and to the Minister on the basis of that. But I think we would like to explore, we understand maybe, Paul, if there are systems that the EA is exploring that we could maybe engage on.
I think I was just going to add briefly, I'm a great believer in there should only be one version of the truth, and we need to make sure we don't make the mistake of creating two systems, one on Rathgale and one on Academy Street. The work that we've talked about, that we need to focus on developing a new strategic approach, a strand of that is developing how we collaborate and work together. Part of that will be, let's start with the building block of the new system that we're currently procuring and installing, and to what extent does that meet the departmental needs, because obviously the department can have free and open access to that. Then the question is, are there other needs the department has that we don't need? Can we factor them into our system, or can we build them on top of that rather than create a more expensive? And if the truth is, if you have two systems, you'll never know the right answer because you get different answers from both.
Absolutely. And preventive maintenance is more effective than the short-term reactive maintenance. And Richard, you have touched on this, but just for absolute clarity, are you saying that there is currently no planned preventative maintenance taking place?
That's correct.
That's correct. And are there any plans to re-establish that?
It comes back to funding. If funding was available, I mean, the issue now is there's no prospect of that becoming available, because at the moment we just do reactive maintenance. So that's where there is an urgent problem emerges at a school who reported us through the helpline. Beyond that, we're currently accumulating information in something that's likely to be £600 or £700 million of backlog maintenance, and it's after that we would get into the preventative maintenance bit. So I think, frankly, we're a long way from being able to do it. But it's an absolute necessity, because the only way you avoid having the backlog maintenance, and you could avoid £700 million of backlog maintenance by a fraction of that in preventative maintenance at an earlier stage.
And in terms of the funding, obviously you're all bringing your figures together. You're setting out, you're talking about some pretty huge numbers there, setting forward what the needs are. I'm presuming that whenever you're bringing those figures forward, you're setting them out to the Minister. Is the Minister putting your numbers forward whenever he's bidding for allocations? Just was wondering if you could give us a detail of the quantum of how much that you're recommending and is bid for, and how much has come back as a shortfall not approved.
Well, I said earlier in the comments, Dan, that we're bidding at the moment for 91 million in June monitoring. So I did offer the committee a sort of further breakdown on that, if I could just take a moment to find those figures. So in terms of the 91, it's almost 92 million that we're looking for in June monitoring. Almost 19 of that is for inescapable major works and SIP and contractual commitments around those. Inescapable minor capital works is over 36 million. Inescapable youth is just over 3.3. High priority SEND capital investment programme, just over 10 million. High priority minor works to advance on site, 11 million. then transport 6 million, and inescapable earmarked school expenditure 4.75. So that's what we're bidding for. So yes, we are making the Minister aware of the needs, and the Minister is supportive and doing, I think, all he can in terms of seeking to try through the Executive to secure that funding.
Absolutely, and £91 million, and when you're setting it out like that, is the inescapable
Oh, the
items.
inescapable,
this
yes.
is not the preventative requirements. This is not for new bills. That is the inescapable. So it's a huge number, and it would be great if, whenever those recommendations or bids are being taken forward, going forward, we would hope to have the support of the Finance Minister in taking forward capital projects that are looking after the safety of our children in schools, especially whenever links to the Chief Secretary of the Treasury have raised other capital works locally to here in recent times. It's disappointing that it wouldn't be those in terms of managing our school's safety, but thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Diane. Just briefly to follow on from a couple of questions that Diane has asked, how long have the Department and the EA been operating in a capacity of reactive maintenance as opposed to planned preventative measures?
I'll give Paul 30 seconds to think, but in preparing for this, I asked some colleagues across EA if any of them could remember the last time we had a preventative maintenance budget, and we come up blank. No one could remember, and I think you've been around a year or two, Paul.
I've been in and around 37 years, 5 years in this post, and in this 5 years I've never seen a place where we get to plan maintenance.
Doesn't fill me with much confidence. Quite depressing, actually. And it actually raises a wider question of how do we ensure we're getting good value for public money if we're running around with sticking plasters everywhere? There's probably more sticking plasters than plaster in some schools. It's a very serious problem.
Mm-hmm. We agree, Chair. I mean, I think that's why I think it's been really helpful to come to the committee today, because I think it's given us an opportunity, and grateful the Audit Office colleagues for shining a light on it, to outline what the real problems, the scale of the problems we're facing. I mean, I absolutely accept it's not acceptable.
I appreciate that, Ronnie, but with respect, I am sure that countless other permanent secretaries that dated you in that position have said similar things. It just seems as though, and you'll not accept this maybe, but it just seems as though someone has been asleep at the wheel for a very long period of time, and we're just spinning around in the one spot.
I don't accept that, Chair. I don't think that would be a fair analysis of it. I think there are very real life problems there that I'm trying to deal with, Richard's trying to deal with, and our predecessors were trying to deal with in terms of the lack of funding, and therefore things have fallen behind and continue to fall behind.
And I think, Chair, I would just add, up until I started in this role last April, I sat every Friday with the permanent secretaries for 12 years, and I can tell you with certainty for 12 years I heard my counterpart in the Department of Education through a number of different personalities all banging the table in frustration about inadequate funding, particularly for maintenance of the school's estate.
The real question is, how do we resolve this going forward? That's the £1 million question here.
Well, I think bidding for additional funding is central to that. I think if we can, the more funding we can secure, I think there's a willingness here that we want to drive forward with this. I mean, I think, we have processes in place that we could really eat into the backlog of maintenance if we had the funding to do it, and I think that's why collectively, I would hope the committee would support us in saying, this is an urgent need, and this is something that absolutely needs to be addressed. But having said that, I'm equally conscious that my permanent secretary colleagues in different departments will sit in front of this committee and say exactly the same, because that's the reality of the world in which we're sadly living.
It's the one thing that you're united on, yes. There's no doubt about that.
Ronnie, and ask them.
It's the one area where there's no silo. Just before I let Tom do a brief supplementary, just an important concern that I have. The Health and Safety Executive have expressed concerns about unmet statutory obligations. What legal risks does the Department for Education and the Education Authority face due to non-compliance with statutory responsibilities in terms of maintenance?
Chair, I think it's a really important issue. I'll just give a wee bit of context. We have an annual statutory inspection programme. So that identifies issues where there is non-compliance with statutory obligations. That, at the start of this year, had an accumulated backlog of about £29 million. So we're so concerned about this, we took it to the EA board at the last board meeting. What we're currently proposing, on an annual basis, roughly the inspection regime identifies something in the order of about £5 to £6 million worth of work that is needed. So we're in the frustrating position where we can manage that £5 to £6 million annually and deal with those issues as they arise, but with this backlog hanging over us. So we're putting together a proposal which will engage both with our board and with the department. That will be over a 2-year period, that 29 million backlog. We're putting together plans for how we would address 19 million of it this year and 10 million next year. Once we eliminate the backlog, we'll be able to take care of this on an annual basis. What we're doing at the moment, in the absence of securing funding to do that, is prioritising that. So high risk stuff like gas leaks, electrical wiring issues, we're prioritising that. There are some areas where there's statutory compliance required, but it is a much lower risk. We're trying to make sure that that's the stuff that sits for the slightly longer period of time. And obviously this will ultimately land in the Minister's desk, but I think we just need to be prepared. In the absence of securing additional funding for the sector, we need to be prepared to say for 12 months, for example, we will pause as much of our normal minor works programme as is necessary to get rid of this remedial issue, because it is where the risk lies. But to say, we're currently developing a proposal to do that, which we'll speak to colleagues about. And that will, once we clear the backlog, we can work that as issues are identified, they're dealt with pretty much instantly.
Okay. There's a number of other questions, but Colin Gilder, you'll touch on those shortly. Tom, have you still got a slight supplementary?
Just very quickly, it may well be sort of a hypothetical question, but the maintenance and all of that is all back to finance. All back, you haven't got the money. If you had the money in front of you tomorrow morning, have you got the workforce in place to deliver? Have you a plan in place to put the workforce in place to deliver?
It would be a lovely problem to have. I think, yes, we do have workforce pressures, but I'll let Richard, as the operational side, deal with that for you.
Given the scale of the backlog, we will do most of this work. We will manage the work and it will be delivered through contractors. There isn't the capacity in the market to deliver all of this in a 1-year period, and it's a multi-100 million pound issue. I don't know, Paul, could you estimate the sort of, if unlimited funding was available, what's the bandwidth of the sector?
We would make it happen. That would
but
be
not 1 year. It wouldn't happen.
No, but definitely wouldn't happen for 1 year. I can categorically say that. There would have to be a planned programme of working on that backlog. But what I would say is there is now an infrastructure in maintenance to be ready to do that.
It's a problem we'd love to be facing in reality, but
they're starting the south down first.
Cheryl Brownlee.
It'll be West Tyrone first.
Thank you, Sharon. Thank you so much. Like my colleague, I have 2 children as well. One is operating the secondary school on a split site. They're waiting their new build, hopefully, and then a son in a special school. And I attend a number of schools in East Antrim, and I can see they're very real issues that are here. So I appreciate you coming with an open mind. So just in terms of the data piece, and we have discussed this quite significantly here, but how do the EA prioritise maintenance work, and how does this vary across the different sectors?
As I say, I'll ask Paul maybe to fill in the gaps. At the moment, we don't have enough maintenance to face the dilemma of having to prioritise it. At the moment, all we're doing is reactive maintenance. So a school will typically ring our helpline when they have a problem. That is triaged by a maintenance officer who will assign it. Typically, you get 2-hour response, a 4-hour response, or a couple of days response. If the issue is something that, if not addressed, leads to a critical health and safety issue or could force the school to close, we will step in and deal with it. If it doesn't do that, it pretty much is put on the shelf because we don't have the funding to do it. Is there any more granularity?
Yeah, I mean, there is response maintenance, so we do triage that, as Richard has outlined. We also then have the statutory inspections, which is the part about keeping children safe in the schools, and then immediately coming out of that is emergency works, what we call it. So you will have response maintenance, which is triage, you will have statutory inspections, you will have statutory remedial works, and there's something in there we call unavoidable works. So, for example, if we replace the boiler, that would be emergency works. If the whole heating system needs to be replaced, that's a much larger cost, and we would have that sitting there as unavoidable works when the budget becomes available. The last part of the jigsaw is the planned maintenance, which we've all discussed, just doesn't happen. But we've triaged all of that in order of response to schools, statutory inspection, statutory remedial works and emergency works, all about keeping schools open and children safe.
So, sorry, Chair, is this process the same then for all sectors?
Absolutely.
Well,
With exception of GMA and VGs.
So for the controlled and maintained sectors, the voluntary grammar, grant maintained, integrated, look after their own maintenance needs, they will get an allocation. All other schools get an allocation through the funding formula for tenant maintenance, which is the small end. EA is responsible for landlord maintenance for voluntary grammar and grant maintained. They actually get the money for both, and they take responsibility for themselves. So all other sectors bar those two.
Okay. So you mentioned obviously the helpline there. Is that monitored? Are you able to see then where, from some sort of database basically where you're receiving these calls, how fast you're responding, and obviously the intensity or the complexity of those?
Yeah, we've a dashboard around that, so it's all about performance. So we have 12 operators, and something that we have changed, we have a single line, so if the school principal rings up, it's one line and there'll be 12 operators, and that will be triaged by the operators, and there's a technical maintenance officer sitting there advising that the operators on that. So yes, there's a dashboard about the number of calls and our performance response to that.
Do you receive much feedback from the likes of principals or those getting in contact with you about how they feel that system is working in terms of the helpline communication with yourselves?
Yeah, I can share the dashboard with the committee, and that will show you how we are performing. Certainly the single helpless line, the one line, has improved our support and responsiveness to principals. I think the frustration is around the response of the old legacy term service contractors, and that's something with the new term service contractor. As we embed that throughout all of the schools, you will see a vast improvement in that.
Separately, this year, I think for the first time in February, we put out a comprehensive survey to all school leaders across all sectors, asking for detailed feedback as part of trying to develop an improvement plan across EA. So 322 out of the 1,100 odd school leaders come in, and we were asking for granular detail about areas where we offer services where they were less than satisfied, so that they could work with us to start to fix that. And that's something I want to do on an annual basis, and just to make sure we're addressing the issues that really matter to school leaders.
Probably what I feel on the ground is, I know there's things here we're discussing today. Funding's a massive one, but communication is absolutely key. And every time I speak to schools, what they're saying to me is, we know there's a funding issue. We know there's something that we can't change overnight, but there's a communication thing that we certainly can. So I think having that honest, open dialogue, if a teacher is contacting, using the helpline, somebody at the end of the phone answering it and getting back and saying exactly what they're going to do. But so appreciate that. Just in terms of the data, I want to move to the SEN piece. Obviously that is a huge pressure on the department, and one that rightly needs address, and those children need the very right support and assistance. But how is the school estate budgeting for that, and is the department and the EA working with officials from the Department of Health, for example, to future plan to ensure that in years to come we're prepared, we're ready, and we have a school estate that's suitable for children with special educational needs and disabilities?
I'll let Richard maybe deal with the operational side. In terms of the issue with the Department of Health, yes, I do want to give you that assurance, and I met very recently with the new Permanent Secretary in the Department of Health to discuss this very issue, because I think we do collectively need a task force of EA, the Department and Health to come together. So, he recently appointed, and I have had that conversation with him about trying to take that work forward. But in terms of the operational side and the placements, I'll let Richard deal with it.
I think there's a number of issues just in terms of the generality of management of the estate in response to the Minister's concerns and the prioritisation of SEN, rather than SEN being dealt with through a disparate approach through a number of different lines. We've now established a coherent budget line for the special education needs, which is just trying to bring it all together and give a particular focus on it. The big issue we face is twofold. There's ensuring that existing SEND provision is fit for purpose and up to standard. That's part and parcel of the sort of generality of the issue we have today. There's the particular challenge we face in the creation of new capacity. As things sit at the moment, it's an issue that's keeping Ronnie and I awake most evenings. We are genuinely concerned that come September, there are a fairly large number of children that we simply won't have a place to offer them for school in September. So we're proactively working with school leaders. Ronnie and I visited quite a large number of schools. The Minister last week wrote to a large number of schools to encourage them. So that's firstly about schools coming forward and being content to work with us to create that. Then it becomes an issue for our capital colleagues to actually get out and deliver that. But the budget is available on a specific allocated basis to create that capacity. We just have to get placements for these children.
No,
Sorry, I was just going to add to what Richard said. It may be just helpful to give the committee some figures around that. So investment in special asbestos provision has increased considerably in recent times. So when you look over the last 5 years, the total capital investment has risen from 7.8 million in 2019-2020 to over 51 million in 24-25, and the allocation is 70 million in the current year. So, huge amounts of additional funding are being put in there, and the Minister has been supportive of that and driving it.
And definitely, it's something that every child deserves a school place, and particularly one, especially for children with special educational needs, in the right environment is so crucial. So it's good to hear that. I just wanted to touch on, actually, we discussed there about the different sectors and how maintenance is done. So has there ever been a survey, or has there ever been kind of an in-depth look to see if the voluntary and integrated schools who handle their own maintenance do this differently or better than controlled or maintained sector?
They're part of the condition, because our condition survey will extend to so that may be information that we have at a point in time. I don't think Paul will capture it at the moment, do we?
We are, as Richard said, surveying GMI voluntary grammar schools, but it would be something that we could look at, certainly, and see what the comparison is, looking at the data.
It's always good to have a look at best practice, see how it's being done well, and how we can manoeuvre that to make sure all schools are getting the best possible service. So thank you.
Thank you, Cheryl. Members, I'm conscious that we have now been grilling you for 2 hours. I think it's appropriate if we have a 5-minute comfort break, if that's appropriate.
The halfway stage.
And get you a breath.
Well, I mean, it's a long time to get a clock. It's okay. It's a long time to get a clock. So
Okay, if that's okay.
Yeah, of course.
Right.
Senate Chamber. Sound. 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 Senate Chamber. Sound.
Yeah.
I just emailed him recently. I was looking for something.
Yeah. We'll work that out.
Done the very same thing.
Okay. Okay, members, thanks very much. We are now back in live session, and we still have with us our witnesses. Permanent Secretary Ronnie Armour, Richard Pengelly, the Education Authority, Chief Executive Paul Crooks from the Education Authority, and Stephen Creagh from the Department of Education. So thanks for your patience and for taking our questions. We have a number of other members that have a number of questions that they'd like to raise, and we're going to go remotely now with Padraig Delargy MLA. Padraig, you can hear and see us okay?
Yeah.
Okay.
I can, Chair, thanks.
All right.
Okay, thanks. So, look, been obviously a huge number of questions already. And Chair, just at the outset, I want to declare an interest just as a former teacher and also as a current member of a Board of Governors of primary school.
Okay, thank you.
I suppose just to touch on a few of the issues that have been raised already, I note there are pilots and those are very welcome. But Richard, the one that you touched on earlier I thought was interesting around electronics and how, you know, there could have been issues and those weren't protected under the EA and so on, and I get that. But for me, there are other issues like if you're doing painting or something that are much more obvious for anybody on a, you know, an inspection basis. And I just think in that mindset where there is obviously a significantly higher cost for schools to get that work done themselves rather than the contract out, it just doesn't make sense for money, and isn't value for money in my opinion. And I suppose then just the Audit Office report had highlighted a few of the issues and had mentioned, you know, one of the things was around managing maintenance performance with those contractors. And there were obviously issues with that in the past. Can you now give us as committee an assurance that you are now getting value for money?
Yes, thanks for that. Paul will have a lot of the detail in this, and there's probably a limit as to how much detail you want, but the 18 new contracts that are in play now, some of those went live I think on the 1st of May, and there's a couple still to go. But part and parcel of the, I mean, one of the big issues with the previous approach was that there was a much smaller number of contracts in place, and particularly for some rural schools, they found that if they had a problem, there was an inordinate delay in a contractor coming from Belfast to deal with their problem. There was just simple issues about performance. So the 18 lots that have been broken up on a geographical basis to align with council areas as much as we can, there are key performance indicators in terms of responsiveness and time to deal with the issue. There's equally a set of metrics around the quality. What we're also putting in place is a system whereby rather than us have to go out to physically inspect work, we get before and after photographs automatically uploaded to the system so that we can do that remotely, which just frees up a bit of capacity. So I think that the short answer is yes. The new contracts will allow for better monitoring and management. What we haven't done yet with the new contracts is actually get into any form of sanction where performance hasn't been what is required, but we will move towards that. Is there anything, Paul, you want to add?
I think you've done my job, Richard. You've made it very easy for me. Thank you. No, but absolutely right. We are letting it bed in, and in June we will be introducing financial penalties. So all the points that Richard has articulated is within those KPIs. I would just say that the contract that we had has been there for many, many, many years, and this contract is fundamentally different. It is written by us, for us, and for schools.
Okay, and I suppose on that, one of the big issues that's raised with me by principals isn't just around the quality or the cost, it's also around the time, and you've touched on that with other members as well. I have a school in Derry that have contacted me just in advance of this committee, who had mentioned that they've been waiting from 2020 for a maintenance issue to be resolved. Firstly, is that commonplace? And secondly, do you think that that's acceptable to be waiting over 5 years for a maintenance issue?
Absolutely not acceptable. I'm a bit disappointed because that's not the target that we're aiming for, and the new TSC will address this. This is about performance, not just by maintenance, but about the term service contractors. So I would welcome the opportunity to get details of that, and then I can get further information what has happened there.
Okay, well, that's welcome, and I suppose I'm happy to do that. I would say, however, that it's not an isolated incident. We're contacted, and I'm sure everybody else in this room is, routinely by schools who are waiting extremely long periods of time for maintenance, and obviously I don't need to tell you that the issue intensifies in that period of time, and therefore more work's needed. I suppose just to move on to another point from the report was that around 77 million is allocated and only 5 million of this is actually being spent on maintenance in schools. And we all know the current funding restraints, but do you think that that's acceptable? And also, I suppose what I would really like to know is where's the other 72 million being spent?
Yeah. There's actually a wee bit of confusion over this bit in the report. I was looking at this the other day. Firstly, the 77 million isn't allocated as such. We have a formula which works out how when the minister, when the executive make a budget allocation to the department, and that goes through the processes, and that comes down with a large quantum of funding that is available for the delegated budget for schools. We have a formula that then distributes that between schools, so it doesn't determine the total amount, but it determines how the total amount is allocated. One component of that formula is for premises, and that's based largely, it's I think about 60% on the size of the school building and about 40% on pupil numbers. The important thing is that just distributes the delegated school budget. So at first pass, it's absolutely for school leaders to determine how that funding is spent. It's not that the 77 million goes out and school leaders are compelled to spend it in a certain way. So that's the first point. More importantly, the 77 million is the notional indicator for premises cost, not for maintenance. So premises cost is the full range of costs. So that will include things like both building maintenance and ground maintenance, utility costs, the cost of caretakers and cleaning. The 77 million that you refer to, if I look just at the controlled and maintained bit, 27 of that was for voluntary grammars and grant maintained who do their own thing and don't have to report that to us. So of the 77 million, 49.4 was in respect of the controlled and maintained sectors. So that's 49.4 for premises. Against that, controlled and maintained schools spent 99.6 million in that year on premises costs. So, as I say, there is local delegated authority to determine how to spend it, but notwithstanding that, more was spent than the formula suggested.
Okay, well, I know you have provided us with some of the detail around that. I was very disappointed that it was only broken down into 2 categories and then an overall total given per year, because what we had requested was a breakdown per constituency and actually per school as well. So I suppose what I would like to know is, do you have that data? And if so, firstly, I suppose, do you have it? But secondly, have you chosen not to provide that to committee, or is there a reason that you haven't provided that to committee?
No, it's not that we've chosen not to provide it to the committee. We got the letter, I think, towards the end of last week. I think we gave you what we could give you in the time frame. In terms of if we can break it down by constituency, Stephen, I know you've been doing some work on this.
Yeah. Sorry, the letter it was only asking for a breakdown over the past 5 years. It didn't actually ask for constituency. Just to be sure.
So if I can just kind of outline that detail, the detail that you've given us over a week is that you've given us 2 figures for each year. So you've essentially given us 10 figures. And that's really concerning to me, because and I know we've touched a lot on data already, but if you can't have that data accessible and ready to go before you come before committee, how can you be properly tracking it?
I think, in fairness, through the chair, we've given you, I think, what you asked for in the letter. The letter, what Stephen has just given me, I said, have requested a list of the total maintenance costs of both primary and secondary in the school estate over the past 5 years be provided. And that's what we provided to you. We didn't actually ask for it to be further broken down, but we're happy to look at that if that's a need the committee.
Ronnie, thanks. Patrick, there's a wee bit of confusion about what was requested, but we're going to seek more detail, but what was received was what was requested. Just there's a bit of confusion on the part of the committee.
So, do you have that detail? Like, if we were to ask you for that ahead of next week's committee, could you get us that detail?
Need to check with finance.
I think we'd need to go back and check with finance exactly how we could break it down. I think I wouldn't want to give a commitment that we could do it by next week, but we'll certainly take it away, we'll look at it, and we're more than happy to come back to the committee and provide whatever we can provide to you.
Is that not data that you've already looked at yourselves in terms of constituency by constituency, school by school? Is that not something that would be available to yourselves that you've already looked at?
I'm not saying it's not available. I'm saying I haven't looked at that specifically, and in the context of the letter that the committee sent to us at the end of last week, we provided what you asked for. We'll take it away, Padraig, and look at what you're now saying to us. If that's what the committee would like, I will go back and look and see. I'll go back and look and see what we can provide, and certainly if we can provide it, there'll be no issue. I'm not saying we can do it for next week, but because I just don't know what's involved in that. But we will certainly provide what we can.
Yeah, I get that. I suppose my overarching point here is, if I was to ask you today, could you give me a rough comparison between maintenance spend in Derry compared to Newry or Fermanagh or Antrim or Belfast or Armagh or any place in between? Could you give me a rough idea of those costs?
I couldn't, and I just don't know if we would be able to do that. I suspect we may well be, but I'd need to go back and look at the information we have and how it's broken down.
Yeah, you see, to me that's problematic, because it actually creates a situation where if that information isn't something that you know offhand, then that creates a situation when we're asking these sort of questions that we can't get the answers that we need. And I think that's data that should be known. I think that while I don't expect you to have the exact figures, I would expect you to be able to give a comparison between areas, between constituencies.
And I'm not saying we can't. I'm saying I need to go back and just look at the precise nature and how we would do that. But there is a willingness on our part to give the committee what you asked for, and we'll certainly go back and look at that. But you know, in terms of what I've come today to talk about and what we were asked to provide, we have provided what you asked for, and I will take it back and we'll look. I'm not saying we can't do it. We'll go and look at that.
Can I just add that in terms of accessing that information, I mean, there's absolutely an issue about transparency and accountability and being responsive to the legitimate requests coming from a committee. But just to be clear, in terms of managing our maintenance programme, we wouldn't routinely compare how much is spent in two different constituencies with a view to trying to balance that in any way. We deal with maintenance problems as they arise, and the triage system applies only to the criticality of the problem. It's blind in a sense in terms of what geographical area that problem has arisen in.
Yeah, no, and I appreciate that, and I appreciate that you are going to, you know, provide us with that enhanced detail, which is very welcome. It's just that I'm quite confused as to why that detail wouldn't be more readily available, and as to why, when you are looking at it in an overarching way, but why there wouldn't be an understanding of that type of data overall. That just concerns me about the overall understanding and look at data. I suppose just to touch on another point, and I know we're focusing on maintenance here, but I do think that it's inextricably linked from the bigger issue, which is around new builds. And like, just by way of example, the primary school that I went to, St Eugene's in Derry, was promised a new build when I was at school, which was in 2002. That never happened. And last year, the school roof actually collapsed, which, as I'm sure you know, has put a lot of the classes out of the school and into the other site. Now, that's firstly and primarily a huge safety risk to pupils, to staff, but it also has financial implications. And I suppose what I want to know from that is, you know, the fact that new build wasn't achieved in 2002, I just think that as a case study, it's really interesting to look at in the context of this inquiry, because it actually shows that had the money been spent properly then, you wouldn't have these issues arising now. You wouldn't have the safety concerns which have been exacerbated and which have grown over time arising today. And that to me is critical. Like, children and staff's lives were put at risk because this work wasn't done. And it's as simple as that. That's the reality. So I do think that there's an overall picture to be looked at. And I appreciate that this report focuses on maintenance, but there does need to be a look at the link up between maintenance and between the capital side of things. I would really appreciate if that data could be given, provided for next week, because I do think that it's useful for us to look at and to get a breakdown of.
We'll take it away and look at what can be done, Chair, but you know, I do want to assure the committee that we can do it for next week. Of course we'll do it for next week.
Yeah, the confusion's actually on our part, Ronnie. What the clerk and the committee team requested, you have provided. We probably should have been a bit more broader in what we were requesting, so you can keep us updated on.
Yes, whatever the committee require, we will do our best to try and meet that.
That's right. Okay, Colin Gildernew.
Thank you, Chair. Audit. Just a wee point of clarification before we get to my main area of question. Ronnie, in your initial setting out of figures, you had stated that there was an 83 million shortfall.
Yes,
when you stripped out the 59 million for Fresh Start and 102 for Stroul.
Yes.
83 million shortfall, but the June monitoring bid was for 91.6. Yes. So is that Stroul 4.75 that you mentioned? Is that so? What is that 4.75? That's an overrun on Stroul to date, is it?
Not an overrun. Stephen, do you want to?
No, it's once the scheme goes on site, obviously construction can either be quick or can reach issues. At the minute, we're being reported that Stroul is performing very well on site, and it's basically just to increase the amount of allocation for the year. That is seeking to increase the earmarked allocation. That's not dipping in on any conventional. Yeah.
Okay, just wanted to clarify that. Yeah. So I suppose then the other overarching thing is there are some very, very worrying messages there, and perhaps one of the most worrying things is the kind of a perception that it's almost, because it's only the most essential things that are getting done, problems, and there's no preventative maintenance going on, so problems are increasing. It's almost potentially one step forward, two back at times, and that's really. And we talk in academic terms at times almost around underfunding according to need, but this is where underfunding brings you to. we talk about austerity and 15 years of austerity, and this is the outworking of 15 years of austerity, because less and less of the preventative stuff gets done, and it's all costing the system more. And you also add that decades of underinvestment in key infrastructure right across the north, and that's all. That's not just passive. That's having an active cost in terms of how much it's costing to run the system on outdated buildings. And you mentioned, I think, is what crystallises that more than anything else is probably your mention of single glazing, and it's almost shocking in this day and age to hear about how much of the school estate remains single glazed.
I wouldn't know that figure off the top of my head. Would Paul may have
I don't have it off the top of my head, but I can provide that information to the committee.
Well, you did say there that there has been condition surveys done on 39% of the estate. Do you have the figure for that 39%? Maybe it's not representative, but do you have the figure for that?
Not with me, but I can provide that to the committee.
Yeah. Because I take it like that's costing a fortune in the education budget to heat those inefficient schools. It's having an impact on our carbon footprint, all of that. So I think these are like there's a real necessity here to almost invest to save, to get ahead of the curve, and we're not going to, I know you're trying to demonstrate your willingness and your positivity should money be there to do these things and the plan to do that, but until we get proper funding, not only that addresses the need now, but addresses the historic impact of the tail end of the underinvestments that are crippling public services, that's going to remain an issue. So I'm moving on then to my key questions are around safety, and just to illustrate this, I'll give you the example of school in my constituency, St McCartan's in Clogher in South Tyrone, which I've raised in the Assembly before. The school more than doubled in size as a result of sustainable schools and area planning, an influx of students, which is was deemed necessary and deemed the correct thing to do. There was additional mobile classrooms given to provide some classroom, but no additional, and there is an approval for a minor works hall. There's been no extension to the dining facilities or the catering facilities that needs, which means children are having to be fed lunch in 2 or 3 shifts. Staff are sitting in, and I've seen it myself, I've been there, shoulder to shoulder on chairs, eating their lunch off their knees, and they're almost touching what you'd call a broom closet nearly. That's where staff are eating their lunch, because they're using every available space for everything else. And those things have real impact. Like those are the staff have to do Granny and Granda's night has to take place over 3 nights. That's another 2 nights staff are having to work on it. So that's all having an impact, and that's bad. However, there are also very real safety issues, and there have been several incidents in the school where there have been injuries to children that are associated with and accepted as having been due to overcrowding. So, Ronnie, in the first instance yourself as Departmental Accounting Officer for the school estate, how confident are you that all our schools are safe for children as we sit?
I think that's a very challenging question, Colin, to answer with over 1,100 schools and a situation that I suppose is ever changing in the context that we're working in at the moment with the backlogs and all the rest of it. I suppose the answer I would give to you is I'm as confident as I can be. We have robust reporting mechanisms in place. I think EA colleagues have already explained in terms of how they process that and how they triage that, that we're focusing on dealing with the most significant issues. But I can't get away from the fact that you've given a very good example of an area where there is overcrowding and where there are challenges. I mean, I know that health and safety, is all our responsibility from the Board of Governors right through to the department. I mean, we will certainly seek through EA to address the most significant issues that are brought to us, to triage those and address them. I can't really speak of the detail of the example you've given, but I'm more than happy. I'm more than happy to take that away and look at it. But do you want to make comments, Stephen?
Yeah, if the school principal or the chair of the governors wishes to escalate that, because as Ronnie referenced, there are health and safety responsibilities with the governors of any school, and if there is such significant overcrowding issues that are leading to safety issues, they should flag that, obviously, first and foremost with the maintenance help desk.
Even they've been flagging it, as have I repeatedly.
Okay.
They've done their job. They've raised them. But listen, I don't want to, like, I'm using that to illustrate the wider problem.
No, absolutely, accept that.
So the school have absolutely done everything they can. In fact, they're going above and beyond to maintain services. But it's symptomatic of a wider problem that we're discussing, and it's probably happened. And actually, so again, going back to the 39% that have had conditioning surveys taken, are there any indications within that 39% as to schools that are unsafe?
Paul, do you want to?
The condition survey, what I would say is the statutory compliance is more about the safety issues purely from a maintenance point of view. The condition surveys, yes, of course, they will look at the fabric of the building, and if there are critical safety issues, that would be flagged up immediately to maintenance to address.
How many have been?
I don't have that information at hand. I can supply the committee with that. But all I reassure the committee that the safety issues in relation to maintenance are our top priority. What you're discussing, Colm, our capacity, the size of the school.
No, capacity is leading to safety. There have
Yes,
been safety
absolutely. That's my
incidents
point.
as a result of capacity.
Yeah.
Okay, and then Richard, so as an employing authority then, how does the Education Authority ensure the estate is a safe workplace for all staff?
I think, Colin, it's very much a similar issue to the points Ronnie made. I mean, I wouldn't differ. I mean, clearly it would be ludicrous to have a situation where a school is safe for pupils but unsafe for staff. It needs to be safe for both, the same set of issues. I think, now, notwithstanding the caveat that nowhere can ever be perfectly safe because slips and trips will always happen, I think primarily because of the statutory inspection regime, I think the language we would use is they're as safe as we can currently make them, and I think it's safe to an acceptable level. I would like to go further. If the question, if we between are the schools in an acceptable state? Are they fit for purpose? No, they're not. We should do better for pupils and for staff, and we will continue to work on that. But the key point in safety is the point I made earlier about we need to work hard on a proposal to eliminate this £29 million backlog of statutory remedial works. That's really where the rubber hits the road in terms of safety, and we need to get on top of that and eliminate that and get us. If we eliminate that 29 million, I can say here with authority to you that as our inspection programme rolls out over the course of a year, everything at issues will be dealt with in that same financial year. That's a much more comfortable place to be than we are today.
Is any of that 29 million, by the way, a emergency or whatever way phrase used there is any of that related to RAC, the reinforced
No,
area?
it's completely
separate. Are there any safety issues?
We've only one school thus far we've identified with RAC, and that's been addressed.
Yeah, well, we've undertaken to just get the figures here. Yeah, there's initially when RAC was we were aware of RAC, 122 initial surveys. There was a further in fund provided to the Department of EA, a further 180 surveys done of schools right across the province. That has not then shown up any further instances of RAC within our school's estate.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Colin. There's a wide variety of things. I'm going to just touch on briefly as well the Climate Act responsibilities. So, Ronnie, can you confirm that all new schools are being completed to a standard that will allow the Department to deliver on plans for net zero carbon emissions without the need for expensive retrofitting? For example, in my own constituency, Strudel is well on the way. I'm told it's going to come in under budget. I'm not going to hold my breath, but I'd be very happy to hear that that is the case. But is it the case that those buildings will be fit for purpose in line with the requirement of the legislation?
All new builds that are authorised now will meet the requirements in terms of the legislation. I mean, the Strudel campus has been developed with a very strong focus on low and zero carbon principles in line with our standard guidance. So there's a lot of work going on around Strudel in terms of green energy measures and so on. So we are making progress with that. But if you're asking me in the future, will there be work to be done? Yes, I suspect there will be, because we'll not, when Strudel started, we weren't starting from where we're starting now, I suppose.
It was supposed to be direct about it. Will the school be built to a standard as required within to meet the standards of the legislation, the Climate Action Act?
It'll certainly be built to the standard of the legislation when Stroll started as a concept.
Which is how long ago?
That's probably 10 years now, I would say.
Yes.
Yeah, so it's not going to meet today's requirement.
It's not going to absolutely meet.
We're spending on Stroll?
I think it's 375 million.
Right, so we spent 375 million, may come in under budget, hopefully. I'll be first to praise you if that's the case. But we have a shiny new educational campus with various schools on site, but it won't meet the standards of the legislation. So what would the retrospective cost be then on top of that?
I wouldn't have the retrospective cost.
It'd be substantial.
I'm sorry, well, I would suspect it would be substantial, yeah.
So it really doesn't guarantee good value for public money then, because we're not doing it right the first time. I get the delays and the issues that exist, but surely there must be some measure to ensure we can fix those things. How many? So I made my point in relation to that. So that's schools that already have received planning. So see any school, say next week there's a number of schools announced and they go through the planning process. Will they
will be built to the standard of today? Yes.
Of the legislation.
Yeah.
Okay, well that's good. Okay, and just a final question from me. Within the existing schools estate, there are schools where it'll cost more to retrofit them than to knock them down and build brand new schools. I'm sure there'd be a wide list. Is that the case, given the projected cost of meeting the net zero targets?
Obviously, retrofit is going to be something that we're going to have to look at. I mentioned that earlier, looking at a pilot exercise to look at a number of measures. We have to make sure we have the appropriate metrics in place to make sure we've got those measures. Obviously, it's an aged estate. We've got other factors associated with the estate, not just energy and green growth that we have to contend with. There's many of the schools across the estate just are simply not suitable in compliance with the current handbook. We've got incorrect sized classrooms, corridors. We've got the school referenced earlier there, over capacity. We have a number in that area where we've actually had to put modular accommodation in. Obviously, a business case will be done and all options will be looked at in terms of whether it is better value for the public purse for a complete new build versus the retrofit, but it just depends on the nature and the individual schools. Some probably will lend themselves to retrofit more straightforward than others. Many of our schools in the estate are actually listed where we are actually restricted in terms of what we can do. We've just completed a primary school in East Belfast, which was a listed building, and it does add extra costs on, there's no question. And we are restricted in terms of what you can change in terms of the facade. If they have, some listed buildings do require you still to keep the single glazed metal windows in place. Now we have to come up with other factors to address that, and we do that obviously.
I understand it's not straightforward. I'm just thinking about Stroll as you're speaking there again, and just to touch back on it briefly. I know earlier that you had said that it would be quite costly to interrupt the process that has already begun, albeit 10 years ago, but has there been any assessment as to whether it would cost more to disrupt the process or actually do the retrofit in the long term?
Stroll have come back to us in preparation for this. They have an estimate of 40% uplift on costs to actually meet that, because the design was based on approvals that dated back to 2015 and 2016 when the design and the statutory planning approval were in place. That said, I should add that there is thermal modelling underway. The design does meet current statutory requirements in terms of ventilation, thermal comfort, indoor air quality, so there's a lot of the factors are actually being addressed. Also the independent measures, your BREEAM and your CQUAL, they are targeted and aiming to achieve the excellent standing. In discussion with CPD in 2020, when we had the announced list, we were looking to see could we pilot some green growth initiatives in those new builds, and CPD were suggesting you could go for BREEAM outstanding as opposed to BREEAM excellent, and that would meet that. Just want to give assurance that there are measures are being taken on Stroll to bring it as far and as close as possible. That said, there is no doubt it will not meet the net zero requirement, but it will meet many of the other requirements under the regulations.
And just finally for me, would it be reasonable for us to conclude that with the way things are currently, financially and with other demands, that the schools estate will be making very little in terms of little contribution to the achievement of net zero? Or have the department any hope that they could meet the requirements of the legislation as laid out in the Climate Act?
I think it's going to be very challenging for us. I think, as Stephen said, there are a number of sort of pilot work ongoing, but I wouldn't want to mislead the committee to think or to underestimate the scale of the challenge that's ahead.
The department is represented on the cross-departmental working group in that regard, so we will give it our best endeavours to keep pace. But I think many departments are struggling with this, is the feedback from that group, in terms of the funding availability to actually bring much of this forward.
Okay, and very finally, you'd be glad to hear, is there any recognition or assessment that the physical condition of schools in their current state has any impact or effect on pupils' well-being and educational outcomes?
I think the environment in which children learn is really important, but I've not seen evidence to suggest that there's a direct sort of negative impact. But I think what we're saying to you today, that we believe the environment isn't acceptable and that we need to do more around that, and we need to have the funding available to do that.
Has there ever been an attempt by the department or the Education Authority to measure that?
Not that I'm aware of, Chair, no.
You think it's needed?
Look, I think as in all of these things, absolutely. I think it's something, it would be information that would be very helpful and useful to have, not least, I think, in helping us to make the case for additional funding.
Okay. Be relieved, we're nearly done. I'm stunned at the 40% figure, by the way, in my mind. I'm trying to comprehend how that is so high. So I'd be keen, Stephen, if we could be furnished with some further details as to how that figure came about, just in the interests of public funds. Members, any other final questions?
Yeah, just one.
Yes, Tom.
It might be slightly outside of the remit that we're looking at the moment, but finance is a big issue. Schools estates lying vacant. How many school estates are we lying vacant right across Northern Ireland? And obviously, if they were sold on or whatever, disposed of, it may well bring in a bit of income. It's not going to be maybe way up here where it needs to be, but it'll bring in some income. And it's just be good to know what we have in school estates right across.
I'm not sure I have a figure, but I don't know, Paul or Richard would be able to maybe find that for you.
I don't think that provided.
I think the other bit I would add to that, it's an important point about vacant property. We should sell and make use of the money because we have a burning financial problem. I was out last week, a part of Belfast, with one of our MPs. It was up Liganeel direction. There's a plot of land there, for example, that's vacant. It was a former school, it's now vacant. We have plans to put a special education needs facility on it. But the point from the community is crying out for some flat surfaces to access sport. And sport is hugely important for children as part of their learning. We need to be smarter, because my sense, not as an expert, is that site, half of it would be enough for our needs. So we need to work harder to release sites, whether it's to the housing executive for social housing or it's to the community to repurpose for community. So we need to look at all this vacant property, not just for selling, but for rebadging and reworking and just sweating that asset.
Good to get a breakdown of just how many vacant schools is in every constituency and that type of thing.
We'll take a look at that.
There's a cost of security as well, Tom, which is substantial.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
Ronnie, and there was nothing wrong with the steel frames and single glass. There's a right few of us survived under them, those conditions. The old putty was right at the time.
Absolutely.
You're right, Tom.
Stuart, have you any comments to make? Okay. Dorinnia, you and your team, okay, content? Okay then, just in concluding, I do appreciate your time and for taking our questions today. Obviously, it goes without saying that the current state of the schools estate right across Northern Ireland is not acceptable, and we're dealing with a legacy of underinvestment, fragmented governance, and that must now be addressed as a matter of urgency. I think you get the sense from members of this important committee and the role that we have that we are very frustrated by what we've heard and the state of the schools estate generally. I'm also, just to point out, I am encouraged actually to hear that rolling condition surveys are now underway, and that some steps have been taken to establish clear oversight and planning. But much more must be done, particularly in relation to preventative maintenance and capital prioritisation. We need to get away from the stick and plaster approach, and we need to do more to guarantee and ensure good value for public money. I'm also deeply concerned about the transition of PFA and PPP schools back into public hands, and I would expect, as I said earlier, that the Department provide further clarification and assurance as to how these assets will be assessed, managed and funded going forward, because following today's session I'm sure the relevant schools will have those burning questions for us, and particularly in the constituencies that those schools are in. We will be reporting in due course and recommendations to address some of the very alarming issues we have heard here today, including no strategy in place. There is a desperate need for that overarching strategy. We need to ensure that public money is spent effectively and in the right places and targeted to the schools that are most in need and thereafter. The current approach is quite sporadic and has raised more questions than we have had answered. All members today have shared frustrations about this issue. We hear about it on a daily basis. There is a responsibility, Ronnie, on your department and of course you as Permanent Secretary and Accounting Officer, and equally Richard, yourself as the Chief Executive of the Education Authority. We do have some reassurance by what you've told us in relation to the improvement in the relationship, but also work to continue improving on the culture and the work output and obviously the joined up working that is required to resolve some of the problems that we have. So I do appreciate that very much. So on behalf of the Public Accounts Committee, I want to thank you, Ronnie, as Permanent Secretary, and of course wish you well in your role as Interim Permanent Secretary. Stephen, yourself for taking questions and being here today. Richard, also my first opportunity to meet with you. Wish you well in your role and the challenges ahead, and of course yourself, Paul, as well. There's a number of things that we have requested, and we would appreciate them as soon as time allows. And we'll be keeping a very, very close eye on this as our report, after our report is published, to ensure that recommendations are hopefully accepted and adhered to. So thanks very much on behalf of us all, and take care. Okay, members, I want to also thank Stuart Stevenson and Julie Sewell, who are with us from the Treasury Office of Accounts, and also Dorinnia, our Controller and Auditor General, and her team for being with us today and guiding us through the inquiry. This is an important inquiry for all those that are affected across Northern Ireland, those who work in our schools, our teachers and cleaning staff, caretakers, our pupils, our parents. Everybody that has any relationship with the school estate recognises that it is just not fit for purpose, and there's much more needs to be done. So we'll look forward to our next steps in the inquiry. With that said, members, and your agreement, we'll now go into closed session. Thank you.